So now that we've gotten so many more teases about the inevitable release of the Tomb Kings, we've seen the intel leaked picture, we've now seen this letter. Hopefully by the time this video airs to you guys, we've seen a launch trailer or some sort of cinematic trailer for the Tomb Kings. Settra does not serve, he doth rule. So I'm really excited here to jump into the lore of the actual army roster. I know I've been hyping this up a ton, but I wanted it to kind of fall in hopefully coincide with the creative assembly hype train that is Tomb Kings. So I'm really excited to go over this here with you guys, and we'll do the same format we've done with the Dark Elves or the High Elves or any of the other rosters we've covered. We'll go into the lore blurb before we go into every single unit. We'll say, hey, here's the Necrosphinx, here's the lore about them. Then we'll go into what my interpretation of what they would be like in a Total War Warhammer 2 world, and what they were kind of like in tabletop. You'll be seeing both the art and the models of the respective units we cover, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun for all. But let's kind of start in with the Lord level. Well, the way that the book actually kind of has these constructed, these are going to be the Lord and the hero choices for the Tomb Kings in the Tomb Kings and the Lich Priests. So let's jump in on the Tomb Kings first. Tomb Kings are the ancient, long-dead rulers of Nehekhara. Their mummified corpses have been awakened by magical incantations, and their bodies are now inhabited by their undying, vengeful spirits. The Tomb Kings have been reborn to a mocking imitation of life, transformed into hideous cadavers whose kingdoms have been plundered and lost. Bitter and twisted, the Tomb Kings' rage fuels an unremitting need to conquer. They are the true monarchs of the dead, and they are coming to reclaim their rightful dominion. Upon their first death, the Tomb Kings were embalmed in elaborate ceremonies. Their bodies were wrapped in pitch-soaked bandages inscribed with magical wards meant to preserve their corpses for all eternity. Despite the skills of the Lich Priests, the Tomb Kings now reassemble dried skeletal husks. They are, however, possessed of an incredible strength and withstand injuries that would slay a mortal man outright. The only known way to truly destroy a Tomb King is to set their bone-dry forms ablaze. Revived by the rituals of the Lich Priests, a Tomb King awakens from the sleep of death, possessing all the ambition and lust for power he had in life. Every Tomb King seeks to reclaim his plundered treasures and restore his ancient glory. If this means the subjugation and destruction of foreign lands, then the Tomb King's armies, loyal even in death, rises from its rest at its command. Although it is the magic of the Lich Priest that animates the Tomb King's armies, it is by the indomitable will of the Tomb King himself that they move and fight. Every Tomb King is an aggressive warlord, able to instill their warriors with their own undying vigor. A powerful curse hangs over the mummified royalty of Nehekhara, striking down those who seek to do them wrong. Tales abound of tomb robbers dropping dead as their blood magically turns into sand, or they are engulfed in a ravenous swarm of desert locusts that strip flesh from bone. The most horrible fates are reserved for those that dare strike down these ancient lords in combat. Those who would willingly and foolishly bring about such a demise are truly damned. And this cuts right into a little small paragraph on tomb princes, so we'll read them too. Tomb princes are the sons of the Tomb Kings. Each of the kings of ancient Nehekhara had many heirs, doubtless the result of their extensive harems, but only one could succeed their father to the throne. This was typically the second son of the king, for the firstborn were given to the gods to serve in the mortuary cult. The king's younger sons served as the generals and lieutenants of his armies, and enforced his will over his subjects. Upon their deaths, they were entombed beside the great tomb chamber of their sovereign, in an eternal council of war, waiting for the moment of awakening when they shall resume command of their undead legions. So, the Tomb Kings and Tomb Princes that we see here, we already kind of know from the lore, they're already interred in their tombs, and this happens many, many times after Settra, so you've got a near limitless amount of Tomb Kings, because there's been generations upon generations since Settra was entombed. That you also get these kings trying to match that overall fervor. Now, there's not a lot of crazy special rules for the Tomb Kings, and when I mean Tomb King, I mean the actual unit, not the army as a whole. But they have Nehekhara Undead, which we've already talked about. Nehekhara Undead means that their magical abilities will only apply to them. It'll say explicitly in their lore, which we'll cover in another video as always. That this only applies to Nehekhara Undead, which are different than vampiric undead, or just says undead for those vampire for the undead in the Vampire Counts book. So they're also quite flammable, meaning they take quite a lot more damage from flaming attacks. And that's something I'm pretty sure we're going to see across the line. So all of your flaming attacks that we see in a lot of other armies that are strong against Vampire Counts are just going to be as strong against Tomb Kings here. And the only two big special rules for the Tomb Kings units, Tomb Princes, are the curse, which we've kind of talked about in some of the other heroes. But basically, when the Tomb King is killed, the Tomb King explodes and does damage to everything around it. So I'd love to see that effect in there. It's a really simple effect that, I mean, very easy to implement. So it'd be awesome to see kind of having to make it so that, okay, the Tomb King's embroiled in combat. That's what you want to have happen, because if he dies, he's just going to affect the whole enemy army more so than if he's outside of combat, just kind of doing things here and there. So I'd love to see that kind of that ability that makes a Tomb King both fearful in combat. Like, it sounds like you'd want to kill him from range so that he doesn't explode on your units. I mean, that's how it was in tabletop. But I'd love to kind of see that. I'd love to see those special rules kind of make into the game. He does have, the curse does also do some range damage too, but I would just love to see something where killing a lord in combat meant something in a detriment way. Like, you go to burst down a lord, which is very common strategy. You burst down a lord and boom, explodes, and maybe gives your lord at the same time. So that'd be kind of awesome. And he also has My Will Be Done, which basically means that any unit around him, or any unit that he's placed in, gets his weapon skill, so gets his melee attack if you want to make a kind of a 1-to-1 conversion there. So that'd be really kind of cool to see, like, things in an aura around him, kind of like we see with Thorgrim, get an increased melee attack or something where it makes them fight almost on his level. That would make the units around him, which are for the most part very subpar. Again, we're going to get into it, but the foot soldiers of the Tomb Kings aren't outstanding. You know, oh, this is a great solid front line with good shock infantry. It's not like that. It's not like that in Tomb Kings, I promise, guys. So I'd love to see something like that for My Will Be Done, and how that interpreted to, okay, maybe skeleton warriors, which I wouldn't fear before, now are a little bit scarier because they've got a Tomb King in the middle of them, or around them with like a small aura that increases the melee attack of the in that aura. But at the same time, I'm now scared to get into combat with that Tomb King because I don't want him to explode all over my lord, or explode all over my lord killer, whatever it is. But that's kind of the Tomb Kings here. We'll move on over to the Lich Priests and talk about, because Lich Priests will also cover the Lich High Priest, which is the Lord character, as well as the Lich Priest, which is the hero character. So let's just read this bad boy. Lich Priests are the undying members of Nehekhara's mortuary cult, and they hold the secrets of unlife. They know the rituals needed to draw forth spirits from the realm of souls and bind them once more into corporeal bodies. It is the Lich Priests who rouse the Tomb Kings and their courts from their slumber and awaken their armies for war. Lich Priests are also the keepers of Nehekhara's arcane lore. Through ritualistic incantations, they call upon the power of ancient gods to bestow blessings upon the warriors of the Tomb Kings, infusing their ancient bones with magical energy. Similarly, Lich Priests cast terrible curses upon their foes, summoning vengeful desert spirits to feast on their souls. Since its founding, the mortuary cult was commanded to study the arts of mummification and communion with the gods. Steadily, over many centuries, the priests learned how to preserve a body from decay until the art of embalming had become very elaborate. The priesthood also devised a vast lore of magical incantations and rituals intended to bind the souls of the dead kings back into their royal bodies. Since the king depended on the mortuary cult's knowledge and loyalty in order to live beyond his own death, the Lich Priests held great power in ancient Nehekhara. Indeed, Lich Priests were the only subjects who could not be executed. In this way, the priesthood became a formidable power behind many thrones. Lich Priests acted as advisors and viziers to the kings of Nehekhara, and their status was second only to that of the ruling families. Each necropolis, with the burial pyramids of the Tomb Kings at its core, has a temple dedicated to the Nehekhara's mortuary cult, and it is here where the Lich Priests preside. In addition to the rituals of summoning, Lich Priests have many duties to perform in the Necropolis, including renewing the seals upon the portals of the tomb vaults, maintaining the incantations of preservation, and determining the moment of a Tomb King's awakening. The Lich Priests continue to perform these duties for centuries because they cannot die a natural death, cursed forever by their own lust for immortality. Long ago, the Lich Priests used their accumulated knowledge to trap their own souls within their bodies. and in doing so they extended their lives far beyond those of mortal men. However, whilst their spirits never passed into the realm of souls, their bodies have withered with the passing of centuries, and it is their spirit alone that now animates their form. Without realizing it, the entire priesthood cursed itself, not to eternal life, but to eternal undeath. Lich priests' physical bodies are now little more than withered corpses, hunched and frail. Their dry, wizened skins are stretched like old parchment over their brittle skeletons. Each is garbed in an elaborate headdress, and clutched in their skeletal hands are ritual knives and rune-inscribed staffs, which act as both the Lich priests' crutches and symbols of office. The Lich priests believe the winds of magic to be the breath of the gods, a power that connects the mortal world with the realm beyond. The magical incantations of Nehekhara's Lich priests have been performed over millennia, and they have remained unchanged since that time. The wording of each and every incantation is recorded on dusty papyrus scrolls, written in the mysterious hieroglyphs of Nehekhara's ancient language. Uttered in long, monotonous rituals, the incantations of the Lich priests must be precisely pronounced. The slightest mistake can incite the wrath of the gods. It is not unknown for the angered deities to snap the bones of the offending Lich priests, set his form ablaze, or even rend his soul asunder as punishment. Such are the risks when harnessing the power of the gods. So the Lich priests here, depending on what, if it's a Lich priest or Lich high priest, that depends, level 2, level 4, wizard, whatever one you want to do. Of course, it has no translation to Total War Warhammer 2. They don't really have any special rules that are overly standard or important. They don't have, my will be done or the curse. They don't have anything like that. But they can choose from the lore of Nehekhara, the lore of light, or the lore of death. And I will let you guys know right off the bat before we even get into the lore of Nehekhara, which we will, and again, in another video, it's not that good. It's actually kind of disappointingly not that good. And I'm hoping, this gives Creative Assembly a chance to really kind of flex, that like they can make like the lore of Nehekhara actually good and actually have a mainstay in the army. I mean, right now, if it were up to me, I would not choose that lore if it was based off the tabletop army. It's not that bad, but it's also, you can have way better lores to choose from. And especially if you're going against high elves, you want like an actual good lore to kind of go toe-to-toe with them. But I'm really curious to see how they'll translate the lore of Nehekhara, because Creative Assembly has taken a lot of license in the past with making things have a really solid transition from tabletop, and they've actually kind of fixed some of the things that were broken about some lores transitioning to tabletop. Like Lore of Metal actually has a pretty decent place in the competitive circuit. Like it didn't before its most recent revamp, but in the tabletop, it's like you didn't choose Lore of Metal unless you were playing against Bretonnia or Warriors of Chaos, two heavily armored factions that their armor would actually weigh against them. But I'm really curious to see what they do here, because the Lich priests do kind of need that extra oomph in their lore of Nehekhara, because the Lich priests are pretty important to just the army as a whole. I mean, you kind of need them as a because you need a Grand Hierophant. So the Grand Hierophant is the highest level mage with the lore of Nehekhara, and one needs to have the lore of Nehekhara. So you have to have one in the army. In the tabletop perspective, I'm not sure how they're going to do that in the actual game, but it wouldn't be surprised me if they had some sort of similar mechanic in there. But that kind of knocks out the Lich Priest, and we'll jump on over here to the Tomb Herald now. So the Tomb Herald, though, and the Necrotect, which we're about to get into too, are two more hero choices following the Lich Priest, not the Lich High Priest, and the Tomb Prince. So the Tomb Herald here, let's read this little lore blurb and kind of jump into it. A Tomb Herald is the personal champion and trusted bodyguard of a Tomb King. Obedient to a fault, these mummified warriors cut down their lord's enemies without pause or hesitation, slicing through flesh and bone with every strike until all their foes lie dead or dying at their feet. Tomb Heralds were selected from the ranks of the elite Tomb Guard, devout warriors who had honed their skills through years of warfare. Every candidate for the rank of Tomb Herald first had to pass numerous trials of bravery and loyalty to prove worthy of their honor. Anyone wishing to harm a Tomb King must first get past his herald, a sworn bodyguard who moves to intercept a mortal blow, heedless of the danger. A Tomb Herald was not just a bodyguard, but also a soul guard. His life was intrinsically bound to that of his charge, for upon his king's death he was expected to slit his own throat and serve his monarch in the realm of souls. A tomb herald was then embalmed and buried at the right-hand side of his lord in the order to watch over and protect the king's spirit for all eternity. A tomb herald's golden armor was placed over his death shrouding, and his enchanted blade placed into his hand. Thus, when the Tomb King awakens from his sarcophagus, his most loyal retainer is already standing at his side, ready to slay his liege lord's foes and enforce his will over the lands once more. A Tomb King or Tomb Herald had many duties aside from the protection of his king. Disputes between Tomb Kings of different cities would be settled by a ritual duel between their nominated champions, and the Tomb Heralds often fulfilled this role. Sometimes these battles were fought to first blood, but such were the Tomb Herald's skill in the art of slaughter that the first blow struck was often a killing strike. A Tomb Herald was also the envoy and harbinger of his Tomb King. Only when given the duty of bearing their lord's commands to the distant parts of the realm would a Tomb Herald leave his charge's side, but when they did, they were empowered to speak with the king's voice. Thus, to disobey the orders of a Tomb Herald was treason, and was met with death at the champion's own ruthless hands. The king's personal icon is often carried into battle by his Tomb Herald. This honor is reserved for only the most trusted of warriors, for each banner is a priceless heirloom. These lavish standards were crafted by master artisans, encrusted with a fortune of jewels and inlaid with finely lacquered wood, gold, and lapis lazuli. Emblazoned upon their imposing surfaces are images of death and immortality, and pendants declaring the king's conquests hang below them. The passing of centuries has not tarnished the magnificence of these icons, and they are held as high as they were in ancient times, proudly announcing the deadly majesty of the Tomb King and his eternal army. However, the Tomb King's personal icon is not only a symbol of his wealth and power, they were also magical relics infused with powerful incantations meant to preserve and protect his legions in the next life. It was even said that the breath of Nehekhara's gods touched these icons, blessing them with a portion of their power. The king's most trusted warrior thus protected these artifacts, for superstition had it that if they fell in battle, the gods themselves would curse the king for all eternity. So, the Tomb Herald kind of has this special rule where he is a sworn bodyguard, and basically he can actually take the wounds that he intercepts from the Tomb King. So I don't know if we'll see anything quite like that, or maybe a buff that they can buff up a Tomb King, like target only Tomb Kings, and maybe it'll increase melee defense or armor of the actual Tomb King in question, or maybe it will sacrifice that Tomb Herald's life to give it to the Tomb King. That'd be kind of a cool little thing there. Coming in the kind of in the strain of like a cold blood, but rather than it actually kind of giving the unit a debuff and buffing up their health, it would actually just sap health from the caster, quote unquote, the actual Tomb Herald here. And we know we've actually seen Tomb Heralds as heroes, and we've kind of seen the gamut of what the hero and lord options are for Tomb King. So the Necrotects not going to be too much of a curveball for you guys, since that was the last hero, the last legendary hero we talked about. But they do have Killing Blow. So the Tomb Herald would make a lot of sense to me if it had an AP and an anti-infantry characteristic. Now, I also think that we'll see like an AP characteristic on maybe like a Tomb King, just because of I think that the Tomb Kings are going to need a lot of umph. They're going to need a little bit more than just your standard lord here. The vampires themselves are very tanky and very strong and very resilient, and skeleton warriors and zombies are not. And it's going to be a lot of the same thing we're going to see in Tomb Kings. We're not going to see a very stalwart front line. We're going to see more of an elite or monstrous front line that's going to help bolster the kind of weak front line that the Tomb Kings are going to have here. So I think that their lords and their heroes need to be a little bit more of a threat. Like the White King is a pretty big threat on the battlefield. He's got the heroic Killing Blow and get up close and personal and do some serious damage. And I think we're going to see that with the Herald here. We might even see a heroic Killing Blow on the Herald, which would be pretty cool to see too. But the Tomb King himself is going to need to be pretty stocky, because he's going to need to be the linchpin of that army. And if he falls, it's not going to be good news. But let's square off the Lords and Heroes section of the Tomb King's roster with the Necrotect. The Necrotects that we've kind of already loosely covered, at least with the heroes, but let's jump on into this. Necrotects were the artisans of ancient Nehekhara. They were not common laborers, but architects of extraordinary skill, whose ambitions far outpace what could be achieved in a mortal lifespan. In death, the Necrotects have lost none of their frenetic drive. They are filled with a compulsive need to pull down the inferior, vulgar cities of their enemies and supplant them with vast monuments of their own design. The skills of a Necrotect were in high demand, for every king needed monuments to pronounce his majesty and a vast tomb to house his mortal remains upon his death. Indeed, Necrotects were so valued that upon completing their work, they were rewarded with a ritual execution followed by an elaborate embalming ceremony. Many Necrotects were entombed within the same pyramids that they had built, buried with the tools of their trade and in an intricately carved death mask made by their own hands. The reasoning behind their sacrifice was twofold. Firstly, the king would need artisans to fashion palaces of gold in the next life. Secondly, it ensured that no rival kings could hire their services to commission a more elaborate tomb for themselves. Many Necrotects went to their graves willingly, perhaps for the honor of their beloved king, or because they were unable to live knowing that nothing they created would ever surpass their lord's tomb. Other Necrotects, particularly those whose creative desires still burned strongly, tended to meet with unfortunate accidents such as falling through rotten scaffolding, tripping on slippery stairwells, or drinking poisoned wine. Necrotects were stern taskmasters who oversaw tens of thousands of Nehekharans as they toiled under the blazing sun. Under their gaze, an army of masons carved huge slabs of rock out of cliff faces before vast columns of slaves dragged the stones across the desert and hauled them into position. All Necrotects were foul-tempered, and they would dispense summary punishment at the slightest provocation. They hated anything and anyone that threatened their art. In death, much of their work lies broken or damaged by the greed of tomb robbers and invading armies. Necrotects have been driven to a blinding rage by the wanton desecration of their beloved masterpieces, and they have sworn to have revenge. In battle, Necrotects lead the Tomb King's regiments like the work gangs of old. They exude the same aura of hatred they possessed in life, and their mere presence instills a magical state of fury in the undead warriors of Nehekhara. Necrotects are no longer needed to extort their followers to work faster, and they reserve the lash for those who would defile their art instead, attacking these ignorant wretches with the crack of a whip, strong enough to split open backs and leave spines exposed to the elements. Necrotects saw to the fine details of construction personally, for only they possessed the skills necessary to carve the likeness of the gods into their sculptures and engrave intricate hieroglyphs onto their surfaces. These were not merely ornamental, for the Necrotects were schooled by the Lich priests in the way of crafting potent symbols of preservation. Necrotects may not know the full range of the Lich priests' incantations, but they could inscribe powerful wards nonetheless. In Unlife, Necrotects constantly repair their work, for many hieroglyphs have faded through the passage of time. When a Tomb King awakens, the Necrotects redouble their efforts as they attempt to finish their work. They tirelessly restore the great war statues that stride to battle alongside the Tomb King's skeletal legions, renewing the hieroglyphs of protection. In battle, as Necrotects chant sinister mantras, these inscriptions glow, and the cracked stone of these animated statues flows to repair itself. So, we don't have a overly stalwart combat kind of hero here with a Necrotect, but what we do have is a hero that's kind of a little bit more of a support type hero. So he gives hatred to anyone that he kind of in a unit he's within, but I'm not sure how we'd get that in Total War Warhammer because we don't actually get hatred like that. Hatred allows you to reroll certain characteristics or certain roles in the tabletop. But what I could see that maybe being is frenzy. Maybe he just gives frenzy to a specific unit in the same way that we see the hags. That's just brutal. But like the I'm going to stick with it. The hags of the Dark Elves and how the Cauldron of Blood and such can actually instill frenzy. So maybe we get something of that sort with the Necrotect. You can pop it on maybe some Ushabti or something of the sort. But also he's got a Stone Shaper special rule, which allows his animated constructs within 12 inches of the character on the tabletop to gain regeneration. Now, I'd love to see that either as he can regenerate things in an aura around him. And when I say things, I exclusively mean constructs. It's not just any old unit. It's got to be any of the constructs. So any of the animated constructs within the Tomb King roster can be either directly just kind of get like a passive constant healing regeneration bonus from him, or kind of like something like Cold Blood, where he can pop it on a unit and it will start to regenerate slowly, while maybe conferring some penalties to it as well to kind of balance it out. But the Necrotect is definitely going to be more of a support type hero, in the same vein that we see like a Runesmith. And I think honestly it's going to be one of those ones that you're always going to see in almost every single Tomb King army. I think that depending on how they do the Tomb Herald in the Necrotect, it might be one of those things where you're always going to take a Tomb King and a Lich Priest and or a Necrotect or Tomb Herald. I think it's going to be a 3 Lord, 3 Hero army where you're going to need the utility of that. Like I know whenever I take Dwarfs, I always take the Lord and then 2 Runesmiths. One Runesmith kitted out exclusively for damage, the other Runesmith kitted to the 9s. So I think that we're going to see something like that with, hopefully with the Necrotect, something where they really need to help bolster the army because, again, like I've said, they do need a lot of staying power, and they're going to get that from their heroes, their lords, and their constructs. And they need something to kind of keep those constructs up and running. But that kind of closes off all of the actual heroes and lords of the Tomb Kings. Let's now jump into some of the just the standard units and the special units that we see across the roster. And before I really get into some of those units, those core units, those special units, those rare units, I want to talk about some of the mount options that we will probably be seeing for the heroes and for the lords of the Tomb Kings. So with the actual Tomb Kings themselves and the Tomb Princes, we'll probably be seeing war sphinxes, which we'll get into obviously soon, and chariots. They did not ride horses, or undead horses for that matter, but the Lich Priests on the other hand did. They did ride undead horses, but there is no mention of them riding chariots that I see. But following a trend of other Total War Warhammer 2 units on chariots, I would see it as a possibility. A chariot was a little bit more of a regal position in the Tomb King kind of Nehekhara society, so I'm not sure if they would put Lich Priests on there, but from a Total War perspective, I could see that happening. But let's jump into the first actual core unit, the backbone, quite literally, no pun intended, of the Tomb Kings, in the Skeleton Warriors. As the punishing midday sun blazes, the sands begin to shift, and thousands of sun-bleached skulls pierce the endless tracks of deserts. Sand pouring out through empty sockets as the undead break the surface. Rising up from the dusty dunes comes the eternal legions of the Tomb Kings, rank upon rank of skeleton warriors ready to kill once more in the name of their immortal monarchs. Holding curved swords and long spears, ancient forms awake from their deathly slumbers, forming up into vast regiments with a supernatural discipline that few living warriors can hope to match. The mighty armies of Nehekhara, made up of regiment after regiment of valiant soldiers, swore oaths of eternal loyalty before the gods to serve their monarchs in life and beyond to death. Thus, the bones of those who perished in battle were collected from the field of war and interred in the great tombs pits of their kings' necropolises by the Lich Priests. Soldiers who yet lived after their liege lord had died marched on, and as if in a victory parade to the necropolis on the day of the king's entombment. They strode into cavernous vaults and mighty walled courtyards, their master of arms leading from the front. Here they stood in regiments with their full paraphernalia of war, everything that would be needed to serve a king in the Eternal's army. Arranged in ranks, icons held proudly, the legions were entombed alive. No soldier flinched as the great stones were heaved into position, blocking out the light of the sun. Bravely these warriors stood to attention as hot sand was poured into the tomb pits until the tops of standard poles disappeared from sight. There they remained until summoned by the incantations of the Lich Priests to heed the will of their king once more. The skeleton warriors of Nehekhara are not mindless automatons, slave to the will of an evil necromancer. They are instead animated by the souls of their former bodies. The incantations of the Lich Priests summon the spirits of long-dead soldiers from the realm of souls, and bind them into corporeal forms. However, without the extensive mummification lavished upon their lords and betters, the spirits of these warriors do not retain the full memory of their former selves. Upon reawakening from their death sleep, the only thing that every one of these undead soldiers can recall, with perfect clarity, is their unswerving loyalty to their king and the ways of war that were drilled into them in life. Thus, the skeletal regiments of Nehekhara obey every command of their Tomb King without hesitation. As they served him in life, so they serve him in death. The skeleton warriors of Nehekhara are the backbone of a Tomb King's army. Under the shadow of a gold-topped banner, vast phalanxes of skeletal troops advance in perfect unison towards the enemy, their polished weapons dazzling in the desert sun. As one, the skeletal soldiers turn and raise their large shields, presenting a hedge of deadly spear points to their foes. At an unseen command, the undead advance, wordlessly slaying those in their path without any thought of mercy. Skeletons are implacable warriors that know neither fear nor fatigue. Only a mortal who can overcome his fears and steady his trembling sword arm may land a blow that can destroy such an unnatural creature. At battle's end, the skeleton warriors walk back, alongside their king, to the tomb pits. The only soldiers to break ranks are those that gather up the splintered bones of their former comrades, carrying the broken remains back to their tombs, as the living might carry the bodies of the fallen heroes. Upon their return, the skeleton warriors are once more buried until their sovereign has need of them again. And there's really nothing special about these skeleton warriors. In fact, they're actually very subpar when it comes to standard rank and file. The nice thing about them is that they're extremely cheap. So in the tabletop sense, you could field tons and tons and tons of these. And it's the same way we already see this with the vampire counts and how their skeleton warriors are very cheap and easy to field with with a spear or a sword variant. And I would see the same thing happening here with our skeleton warriors. They're going to have a khopesh, their curved sword, or a spear, those kind of skeleton phalanxes. It'd be cool if they actually had some sort of phalanx that Tomb Kings only had access to, but if they're not going to give that to High Elves or any of the other spear-oriented races, they're certainly not going to give it to Tomb Kings. But again, I see these as pretty kind of basic run-of-the-mill, very entry-level troops. They're going to cause fear because they're undead, but I think outside of that, we're just going to see your rank-and-file skeleton soldier. Every soldier, though, every warrior, skeleton warrior, does need an accompaniment, and this is a little bit different from the vampire counts. The vampire counts, you've got zombies, you've got skeletons, but in the Tomb Kings, you've got skeleton archers. So the skeleton archers of Nehekhara knock and loose volleys of arrows as they advance towards their foe without ever breaking stride. Raising their bows as one, the archers fire, reaching into quivers for another arrow before the first salvo has even reached the zenith of its trajectory. These undead archers unleash great clouds of death that darken the sky moments before falling amidst the ranks of the enemy. Riders are pitched from mounts, and swaths of enemy infantry fall dead as bronze-tipped arrows rain down upon them and pierce their bodies. The kings of ancient Nehekhara knew the importance of delivering death from afar, and all of them maintained legions of highly disciplined archers. Loyal soldiers for all eternity, skeleton archers continue to practice their ways of war as they did in centuries long past. Awakened from the tomb pits of their king's necropolis by the magical incantations of Lich priests, every skeleton archer arises with a bow still clutched in one hand and a quiver of arrows held in the other. There was a strong tradition of archery in ancient Nehekhara, and hunting was a popular sport amongst young princes. However, upon reaching adulthood, a prince was expected to leave behind such pastimes and devote his life to ruling his people. It became tradition for a newly crowned king to honor the greatest marksman amongst his legion with his royal bow. This chosen warrior was bestowed the title of Master of Arrows, a position that held much prestige amongst the common soldiery. However, it was said that should the Master of Arrows miss his target the first time he fired the bow on the field of war, his life was forfeit. Such was the punishment for betraying the king's trust. Skeleton archers are encumbered by the large, heavy shields of the Tomb Kings, Tomb King's other legions, allowing them the freedom needed to fire their long, curved bows. This leaves them with little protection against the swords and axes of their enemies, but any foe wishing them harm must first cross the killing ground, weathering a hailstorm of lethal arrows every step of the way. Only the most heavily armored of foes can withstand such withering salvos. Less protected targets may instead turn and flee from the onslaught. But once an enemy has entered the sights of skeleton archers, the undead will not stop until their foes have been killed. Skeleton archers will relentlessly pursue their opponents for hundreds of leagues if needed, loosing a volley of arrows every time their retreating foes re-enter range. Whilst their enemies will grow wary, the undead warriors no longer have such concerns and will only pause in their advance when the last of their quarry lies dead. Surrounded by the arrow-pierced bodies of their slain enemies, these skeleton archers will then stand perfectly still, awaiting the orders of their king. If that order is not forthcoming, they stand motionless and forgotten beneath the glare of the desert sun until they are buried by the shifting desert sands. So, This description is kind of misleading. I'm not going to lie. The skeleton archers are not excellent. Again, this is going to follow. You're going to follow a pretty. It's going to be kind of boring here when we talk about each one of these skeleton units, because they're going to be the same style of very cheap, very not. I don't want to say ineffective, but they're not going to be the best fighters. I mean, a unit of Empire Spearmen can outclass a unit of skeleton warriors easy. I think you could be even 2-to-1 ratio as far as like their effectiveness against each other. But what's going to be the big crux of this is their ability to field multiple or field a lot of units. That's going to be kind of the big thing here. And the skeleton archers actually have these arrows of Asaph. We've kind of talked about this before, but basically these arrows have a special. They basically have a special kind of enchantment on them, and it basically means they never suffer a penalty. So shooting through trees, they always hit. So maybe that's something that they're going to include into here, the arrows of Asaph, and how they will never suffer penalties shooting over walls, shooting into trees, anything like that. Because that is something that you kind of use as a screen when you're up against an army that does have a lot of range or does have a lot of artillery. You can use those trees to your advantage. Those skeleton archers, and as you kind of got from this description, that's not so much the case, right? They kind of hunt you down to the dead of the night, but again, they're still skeletons. And all these guys are going to be moving pretty slow. They have a 4 movement characteristic, so they're going to be pretty slow on the battlefield, as we've come to expect from any undead, really. Their leadership is a little bit higher. They have a 5 leadership as far as their characteristic goes, so that makes them, again, a little bit more disciplined, like we've discussed. And their strength and toughness is about that on par with a Skiven Clan Rat, or with a Empire Soldier, or actually even with a High Elf Spearman. A High Elf Spearman in the tabletop has a strength and toughness of 3. So that's kind of like, think of it as not necessarily like your hit points, but more or less the ease of being able to hit opponent, or the strength in which you would attack something. So kind of like your weapon strength or your melee defense would probably be the best 2 equivalent properties there. But let's continue this slog through the core units of the Tomb King armies into the skeleton horsemen. And I say slog just because the majority of what makes the Tomb Kings cool is in their special and rare. The core units are what help kind of solidify that thematic undead army, but really we're getting to the meat and potatoes of the army pretty soon here when we get into the special and rare. But the skeleton horsemen. Regiments of skeleton horsemen race across the sandy plains of Nehekhara, mounted on the fleshless remains of their once proud steeds, weapons lowered as they gallop towards their foe. These skeletal riders drive their heavy spears into their foe with bone-jarring force, using well-aimed thrusts that punch clean through torso and rip open throats in a spray of blood. Those not impaled by the cavalry riders' razor-sharp spearheads are trampled into the ground by the thundering hooves of skeletal steeds. Skeletal steeds instinctively obey the will of their riders, displaying the same supernatural discipline as the soldiery of the Tomb King's army. Only occasionally do these undead heroes twitch their heads as vestigial memory of the life surfaces. Even though their flesh has long since vanished, skeletal steeds are as powerful as they were in life, and they can crush a man's skull with a single kick. Unencumbered by the heavy armor or barding, a Tomb King's skeletal cavalry legions maintain a punishing pace as they traverse the scorching sands of Nehekhara. Skeleton horsemen often form the spearhead of a Tomb King's army, and as such they are amongst the first of the undead warriors to engage the foe. These vanguard warriors are not heavily armored knights, but fearless raiders who launch devastating attacks where their opponents are weakest, luring the enemy into overextending their reach before withdrawing to strike again. However, skeleton horsemen are not completely without protection, for they carry large, sturdy shields in battle to deflect the panic blows of their foes. Cavalry were a relatively late addition to the armies of ancient Nehekhara, for horses needed a great deal of water to survive the desert heat. As such, steeds were expensive, worth considerably more than the soldiers who rode them. Only those warriors who had proven themselves and slain a dozen foes in mortal combat were inducted into the ranks of one of their king's valued cavalry forces. These warriors would then spend the rest of their lives fighting from the saddle, drilled under the tutelage of the king's master of horse, a grizzled veteran bearing the scars of several bloody campaigns. In life, these champions often formed part of the Tomb King's Council of War, for their knowledge and experience of mounted warfare were second to none, and their expertise was highly valued. When the Lich priests summon the Tomb King's army from their sandy graves, fully formed cavalry columns stride out of the pyramids at the head of the footed legions. When the enemy is sighted, the cavalry regiment's hornblower signals to charge, and a deep, unsettling discord reverberates about the desert. This otherworldly sound shakes the dust from the statues, and a disquieting feeling of dread permeates across the battlefield. As one, the undead steeds gallop toward their quarry, the skeleton riders on their backs raising their skeletal shields and lowering their spears in perfect unison. Paralyzed with fear, it is a brave foe indeed that does not flee as these deathless horsemen bear upon them. And again here, this is going to be kind of your fast cav vanguard option that we would be seeing. Really your intro cavalry option, I guess you could say, for the Tomb Kings. And these guys have a vanguard option straight out of the book here. There is a fast cavalry special rule. It's going to be on the skeleton horse archers we're going to hear from soon. But I think that skeleton horsemen are going to be rolled into the same category as the horse archers. It's just like we see with Illyrian Reavers. How are the Illyrian Reavers with spears or Illyrian Reavers with bow and arrow? I think we're going to see the same thing here. Because they have vanguard, they've got fast cav on the horse archers and scouts on the horse archers. And even from the description of the horsemen, we hear how they're raiders and how they're harrying back and forth between units, and their job isn't to stay pitched in combat, but to kind of charge back and forth. It's kind of weird to read a lore blurb that basically just tells you to cycle charge, but still, that's the kind of role of these horsemen. And the horsemen still, you're dealing with 2 weapon skill, and that's on a scale from 1 to 10, it's a 2, obviously. And that's, again, me trying to draw a comparison here for you guys that don't really know about the tabletop, what that equates to Total War Warhammer 2. So a 2 would not be outstanding. So you're not having a very battle ready or strong, fearsome unit in just one of these horsemen, but it's the ability to field probably 4 or 5 of these for the cost of 2 Illyrian Reavers. That's purely speculation. I'm just saying that it's going to have to be some sort of vast cost difference to make choosing these guys very beneficial to you, because you can field so many of them on the battlefield. But let's just jump on over then now to skeleton horse archers. So the skeleton horse archers of Nehekhara are likened to an angry desert wind, one that appears suddenly and leaves only the dead and the dying in its wake. Skeleton horse archers move relentlessly across the battlefield, firing volleys of magically blessed arrows into their foes before turning about and escaping retribution. As the undead cavalry turn, they disappear from view as they ride into the cloud of dust, thrown up by the hooves of their skeletal steeds. Before the cavalry archers' stunned victims can recover their wits, the undead horsemen reappear, loosing another deadly salvo. The horse archers of the ancient Nehekhara were very different to the other living warriors in the king's army. They were not soldiers, raised and trained within the vast cities of Nehekhara, but nomadic tribesmen that dwelt in the deep desert. Such warriors knew the ways of the parched plains better than any city-born man, and with their swift mounts they could traverse the shifting dunes without fear of getting lost. Such was their skill on horseback that they were said to have been born in the saddle, and their marksmanship, unhindered by the jarring motion of their galloping mounts, was renowned throughout Nehekhara. The kings had great need of such warriors and guides, and they would pay much gold to hire their services as mercenaries. It was not until the reign of Rakov III of the Second Dynasty that horse archers became a permanent feature in the armies of Nehekhara. Rakov granted these tribes the freedom of the desert, the protection of his grand armies, and as much gold as their chieftains could carry, in exchange for an annual tithe of warriors who would swear an oath of unswerving loyalty and obedience to the king. Ever since then, the kings of ancient Nehekhara maintained strong contingents of horse archers amongst their armies. Skeleton horse archers are the outriders and scouts of the Tomb King's army. Whereas mortal horses need regular rest and water, skeletal steeds cross the vast tracts of open desert at a relentless pace. Even in death, these undead horsemen maintain an innate ability to track and hunt their quarry through the shifting dunes, and no sandstorm can obscure their targets from them. As scouts, skeleton horse archers hinder the movements of the enemy and harass their flanks in fleeting yet bloody skirmishes. These attacks do much to slow the advance of the Tomb King's enemies, pinning them in place while the Tomb King maneuvers his own warriors into position. When skeleton horse archers attack, they strike without warning or mercy. The first an enemy soldier knows that he is in danger is when a black-fletched arrow plunges into the throat of a man next to him. The the gurgling cry of pain, a ghastly prelude to the slaughter to come. An instant later, another comrade falls to the ground, an arrow shaft protruding from his blood-slicked chest, as his pierced heart empties its contents into the desert sands. With every passing second, more arrows find their mark, falling amongst the enemy like a deadly rain. As the skeleton horse archers close upon their foes, their enemy sees them for the first time, appearing through the haze of the desert heat like a terrifying mirage. At a silent command, the skeletal riders urge their undead mounts forward, and the archers' grinning skulls turn to face the panic-stricken survivors. With eyeless sockets never wavering from their targets, the skeleton horse archers raise their weapons and draw back bowstrings once more. As mortal warriors turn and flee for their lives, the last thing they ever feel is the searing agony of an arrow slamming into their backs. So, definitely fits the role of your fast cav kind of archery on horseback unit that we see in almost every other army out there except for the dwarfs, because they have their legs are too small. From a lore perspective, their legs are too small to reach a horse because they smell of cabbage, as we all well know. And those of you that like the dwarves are going to hate me for that statement. But again, so we do have just these skeleton horsemen and the skeleton horse archers. What's interesting here is, and spoiler alert, there are no other standard cav. There's an elite cav, and it's not necessarily a cav option for the Tomb Kings. They have a monstrous cav unit that we're going to get to here kind of soon. But it seems that they're going to have that kind of deficit. They're going to have that, okay, we're going to have fast attack, melee, and range cav, and then just elite, monstrous beat squad cav a la Griffin Knights. Kind of that vein of larger, beastlier cavalry options. But that kind of that rounds out our skeleton horse archers and the such. We do have one more unit in the core that we're gonna knock out here real quick, and then we'll be jumping into the special after that. But we've kind of teased these guys a little bit. At least we'll talk about the chariots, but it is the skeleton chariots, and these guys are well, chariots in and of themselves are kind of lend themselves to the Tomb King roster, as you would expect of a ancient Egyptian army. But let's just jump on into this. The pride of a Tomb King's army is his charioteer legions. Their advance is heralded by a cloud of dust thrown high into the air as they drive across the sands. Moments later, units of these deadly machines crest the dunes, their wheels whirring as they careen towards their foes. The legion impact with bone-shattering force, wave after wave of chariots crushing bodies beneath heavy wheels as their undead crew lay about the disoriented foe with lethal effect. Nehekhara was the first great civilization of mankind, and the place where men first used horse and chariot in battle. This was a great accomplishment, for horses had only recently been bred as beasts of war, but it was considered undignified for those of noble blood to touch such lowly brutes, let alone ride them. However, with the invention of the chariot, the ruling classes of Nehekhara could take to the battle with the speed of a stallion. The ancient armies of Nehekhara included vast forces of swift chariots, and each carried an arsenal of weaponry. To fight from such an armored platform was thought to be the height of civilized warfare. As such, only royalty and nobility were permitted to fight as charioteers. As befitted their status, charioteers were bedecked in fine armor, precious metals, and valuable jewels. Their chariots were created by skilled artisans, often gilded in gold and covered with images of skulls, bones, and other symbols of the mortuary cult. The fighting quality of the king's charioteers was a reflection of his own power and martial prowess. As such, the king entrusted the training of these regiments to the master of chariots. These scarred warriors were typically a minor blood relation to the royal family, such as a cousin, and as thus had the aristocratic superiority to back up his years of fighting experience. The master of chariots was a ruthless disciplinarian, and under his command the noble-born charioteers were drilled until they were elite warriors fit to fight in the king's name. They would ride into battle fierce and proud, the legion's standard carried high as they bore down upon their foes. Ever since their invention, chariots have been the chosen means of transport for the kings of Nehekhara. Upon awakening from their deathly slumbers, Tomb Kings have continued to lead their armies to war atop these ancient machines. Not only does a chariot have an armored carriage to protect him from harm as he slays his foes with every sweep of his enchanted blade, it also provides him an elevated platform. This grants the undead monarch a superior view of the battlefield, enabling a Tomb King to better witness the movements of enemy formations and direct his own troops to inflict the most damage. Squadrons of chariots were entombed beside the pyramids of the kings of Nehekhara, ready to serve their lords upon their awakening and trample over their enemies as they had done in their mortal reign. The mere sight of skeleton chariots, arrayed for war and riding to battle, is enough to strike fear in the hearts of all who oppose them. As the chariots rumble towards their quaking foe, slowly gathering speed until they are ready to charge, that fear turns into outright panic as the pride of Nehekhara crashes into them and the slaughter begins. So, as you can see, the Tomb Kings, they put a lot of stock in their chariots. We've already kind of said it's kind of the height of civilization, the pinnacle of their society. It's what they kind of really base a lot of everything on, as far as like, oh, you're on a chariot, you must be pretty goddamn important. But they have some special rules here. They have the same arrows of Asaph that all archers of the Tomb Kings do, but they also have a chariot legion ability. So a rank of skeleton chariots only needs 3 models to count for a rank bonus. A rank bonus means that it gets you basically extra bonuses for certain rolls. In addition, skeleton chariots add their rank bonus to the strength of any impact hits that they inflict. Now, all this obviously is Greek to those of you that don't really know what the tabletop means, but in Total War Warhammer 2, I see this as skeleton chariot units consisting of more. Rather than just 3 units per choice, I see this maybe concluding as 6, or maybe even 9. Maybe something that's really going to be pretty terrifying. Like, oh man, if I'm the dwarfs, I better watch out. I'm going to be dealing with a lot of skeleton chariots. But the thing about the skeleton chariots, compared to most chariots in other races, is that they're not as sturdy. They still have a strength and toughness of 4. Most races have 5, maybe even 6. So you might be able to field more of these, and it might look scary initially, but they're ultimately not going to be as stalwart on the battlefield, not going to be as durable. So that might be kind of the trade-off that you get with getting 6 or 9 in a unit. You have a little bit slightly weaker, maybe melee defense or melee or just armor for the actual unit itself. So I'd be really interested to see that. And with this, I would see 2 different options. Definitely an option for a archer-based one, and an option that would not be archer-based. Maybe just give it like halberds or spears or something like that. Something that makes it a little bit like anti-large or anti-infantry or something of the sort. They also have the rule that says, and the Tomb Kings rode to war. And basically what this means is it infers bonuses to units that stay with the chariot, on a chariot. So I'm not really sure if they're going to be doing something like that, because they don't really have the capability for generals, heroes, lords, whatever, to join in on units. So I'm kind of dismissing that special rule, unfortunately, because it really only has barons on the tabletop. But I've seen the way that they do a lot of things that I would have thought had a direct one-to-one translation. They've kind of made their own rule for it in a way that really works. So I would love to see them take that rule and make it kind of somehow translate into this. Like maybe if you have a lord on a chariot, they get a leadership bonus, they get a strength bonus, something that kind of gives it falls in line with that kind of skeletal legion, that chariot legion kind of description we've gotten here. But that kind of rounds out here our core units. Let's go on over to our special units, and this is where we're going to get a lot more of the bread and butter, a lot of the more diverse units in the Tomb Kings roster. Since we're already kind of really doing a lot of skeletons here, let's do one of the last actual skeleton units here in the Tomb Guard. The Tomb Guard are the partially mummified remains of the King's elite guard. They are exceptional warriors, maintaining all the discipline and martial skill they had in life. In battle, the Tomb Guard form unwavering ranks of armored warriors. They have spilled the blood of their enemies for countless centuries, and numerous armies have been dashed against their implacable shield walls. The bravest and best soldiers served as bodyguards for the ancient kings of Nehekhara. Elevation into the ranks of the Tomb Guard was perhaps the only way that a warrior not of noble birth could ever hope to enter the royal palaces. The Tomb Guard lived in comparative luxury, each having a dozen slaves to tend to their war gear so they could keep their attentions focused on their sacred duties, the preservation of the king's life and dominion. However, worldly wealth was the least reward granted these warriors. For in respect of their position, they were honored with the privilege of sharing in his immortality. Upon their death, or that of their lords, they were mummified by the Lich priests and buried in close proximity to their king's sarcophagus. Just as they guarded the palace in life, so now they guard the inner sanctum of the necropolis in death, the prospect of sharing in the eternal beauty and immortality of their king, and serving him for all time, inspired these soldiers to heroic acts of bravery. They would die where they stood rather than retreat and charge against the most hopeless odds without thought of their own survival. Time and again, their selfless heroism would bring victory to the king's army, and earn a place in his pyramid for the honored fallen. The tomb guard were entombed with their armor and weapons. Their bodies were further decorated with gold bracelets, headdresses, and scarab-shaped brooches that fastened parchments proclaiming their deeds of bravery and devotion. The tomb guard rest until awakened in their stone sarcophagi, arranged upright around the royal tomb chamber of their king. Here they stand to attention as palace guards until the time comes when they are again needed. If intruders violate the tomb, they will awaken and defend their slumbering lord. If the king rouses from his death sleep, ready to go forth to conquer the lands of the living, they arise and form an honor guard at his side. Although the tomb guard were rewarded with a form of mummification, the embalming rituals used were nowhere near as elaborate as the ceremonies that the tomb kings and tomb princes underwent. However, the tomb guard had been reborn with immortal bodies far stronger and more resilient than the flesh of the blood forms they were in life. Furthermore, tomb guard retained more of their former personalities in the masked soldiery of the skeletal warriors. They awaken with memories of the heroic deeds, bloody victories, and unyielding will to destroy their king's enemies still burning strongly in their minds. Above all, they remember their duty to protect their tomb king from harm, and any that threaten their charges are slain, cut down without pause. As befits warriors of their standing, tomb guards were gifted with fine suits of leather armor and bronze scale studded with jewels and precious metals. They carry lavishly crafted shields inlaid with skulls, bones, and other symbols of death. In battle, the tomb guard wield weapons that had powerful incantations of cursing imbued into them, with which they carve through the ranks of their enemy, cutting through necks and felling their foes with every blow. So, and brooches is a kind of a doozy of a word there for me. But the tomb guard are really your first actual armored unit in the tomb king roster, and they have killing blow, just like their grave guard counterpart in the vampire counts. So, how are we going to see that translate to Total War Warhammer 2? Is probably in the very same way that we see it with Graveguard. Graveguard have that ability to do both anti-infantry and AP, so maybe we'll get that same thing with the Tomb Guard. And let me actually check this out here. For some reason, it is totally escaping my head here. That's the joys of having this book in front of me. But the with this being like the first actual armored unit, we actually get them in. When I say armored unit, it's nothing substantial. They're not in heavy armor. It's just light armor. So, well, as everything else has no armor, they have some armor. And that light armor is equivalent to the same armor that the High Elves have in their rank and file spearmen. So, that's to give you an idea of how, I mean, these guys aren't going to be wading through combat like the Graveguard can. The Graveguard can take quite the beating. With Graveguards with shields can actually kind of get pretty deep in there. But the Tomb Guard can also take halberds. So you're going to have an AP anti-large infantry unit finally, aside from the skeleton spearmen, I guess you could say. But something that's actually going to be able to put a threat to, say, some dwarfs. That's going to have an AP characteristic built into them. Or any of the more heavier cavalry forces like Dragon Princes, or what we see with Cold One Knights, or even actually the entirety of the Lizardmen roster. The Tomb Guard are going to be your staying force against something like that. And their profile itself is slightly better as well. Only 3 weapon skill, so they're not going to be leaps and bounds above anyone else, but they have a 4 strength and 4 toughness, so they're a little bit stronger, a little more stalwart as a whole from a melee defense and an armor perspective as well. So these guys are, again, you're much stronger, more stalwart, actual quote-unquote shock troops of this army. Kind of in the same vein that Storm Vermin, while not amazing, are your shock troops of the Skaven roster. And these have a higher leadership as well, so they're going to be able to really stay in combat a lot longer as well. But that's our first kind of foray down the special route here with the Tomb Guard. But let's kind of let's segue away from skeletons, yeah? And we'll actually go into our first beast unit, or our war beast in a Carrion. Carrion are great undead birds of prey that feast on the carcasses of the fallen. Their broad wings, covered in feathers as black as midnight, darken the sky and spread the shadow of doom upon those dying in the desert. Carrion can smell blood from leagues away, and they are drawn to the battlefields like moths to flame. Wherever carrion are seen to fly, death and carnage are surely nearby. Carrion resemble the black desert vultures that inhabit the plains of Nehekhara, but they are far larger and more dangerous creatures. Carrion are repulsive scavengers that stand taller than a man and have vast wingspans. They have bodies that are just decayed and bloated with death. Putrefied ropes of muscle hang from their frames as they fly with slow, sorrowful strokes of tattered wings. Bones poke through the rotten skin of carrion, and gashes in their distended bellies often expose the skeletal remains of their last rotting meal. Carrion are bald-headed creatures, and in life they would push their long necks deep within their prey's bodies, emerging slick with blood and viscera. They have razor-sharp beaks used to rip flesh from their victims and crack bones for the marrow within. The feet of these undead scavengers are tipped with viciously hooked claws that can rend and tear their prey apart with frightening ease. Carrion lived in the mountains to the east of Nehekhara, and also the deserts to the west. Huge numbers of carrions also nested in the towers and spires of Nehekhara's tomb cities. After a great battle, with the slain strewn over the stricken field of war, the carrion descended to feed in flocks so vast that they blotted out the light of the sun. According to the inscriptions, the carrions were sacred beasts, agents of Ushabti, the vulture-headed god of scavengers who bore the spirit of lost warriors to the sky to fight in endless battles against the demons of darkness. This belief led to the mortuary cult burying the corpses of carrion in the necropolises, entombing many thousands of them within the pyramid of the Tomb Kings. At the will of the Lich priests, these revered avian creatures are imbued with magical essence and once again take to the skies, their horrifying forms spreading fear amongst those who feel the chill of their shadow. Once awakened from the slumber of death, the carrion never again returned to rest within the tombs and vaults of the pyramids. Instead, they soar above the land of Nehekhara as they did in life, never tiring in their search for prey. Being primitive beasts, carrion are driven by the need to feed their insatiable appetites, and they will go great lengths to find their next meal. These ugly creatures learnt long ago that when armies clash, they leave a swath of corpses in their wake, and so when the Tomb Kings go to war, they are accompanied by great flocks of carrion that circle high above. Carrion will feast on the flesh of anything they can find. These scavengers are not fussy eaters and will gorge themselves on both freshly slaughtered corpses and cadavers that have festered for far too long under the baking heat of the desert sun. Because of their immense size, carrion will also prey upon the living. When carrion hunger for live prey, they prefer to hunt the wounded and weakened, for in life they were notoriously cowardly birds, hesitant to battle foes that were able to fight back. When their victims are isolated and outnumbered, however, their ravenous hunger overcomes their craven nature, and at a hissing cry, they can swoop down upon the enemy, eviscerating them with flurried swipes of their talons. So, we have what is effectively an undead great eagle. I mean, they're not very fast, but all flying units have the same move profile. But obviously, they kind of confer that. Hey, they're maybe a little bit slower. Maybe we'll see that translated to Total Warhammer 2. But everything that flies, again, has the same thing across the board. But they have a very low leadership. So maybe that's the kind of thing here, too. So maybe you'll be able to field a lot of these effective undead great eagles, but they won't be able to stay in combat for prolonged periods of time because they'll break pretty quick. So maybe they're going to be used as more of a harassment unit, or maybe I'm thinking they might have either an anti-infantry or an AP characteristic. I'm not sure. I mean, you read their description here, and it makes it sound like they're really just going to rend and tear everything. So I'm saying maybe more anti-infantry, less so than AP, but use them to kind of harass a back line, get deep in there, just generally do some damage, but they're not going to be able to stand up to much punishment. So I think it may be even a way to contest some flying units. Okay, hey, they've got a dragon. I'll throw 2 carrions at them to hold the dragon up, even though that dragon might cause a terror, cause them to rout. I'm not really sure how they would do the carrion here, even though they are undead. So they themselves will be causing fear. So I could see them being very effective against, say, like a greenskin army, where the backline's already going to be kind of weak, or especially a Skaven army, where you're basically flying terror bomb or fear bombs over their army with these carrions. But that kind of knocks out these Carrions. But let's get into another unit that actually, I'm afraid won't be in the game because we haven't seen it with other races, but it's in the Tomb Swarms. The tombs and pyramids of the necropolises are infested with the dried husks of scorpions, scarabs, and countless other poisonous creatures of the desert. Though long dead, the mere presence of the Lich priests and tomb kings fills their empty shells with animation, and they scuttle from their hiding places around the mortuary temples and beneath the scorched sands. The Lich priests have long since gained mastery over these creatures, and they can summon them forth at will through their magical incantations. Thus, when the Tomb King's legions stride to war, they are accompanied by a scuttling swarm that spreads across the land on a black tide of crawling bodies. Those foolish enough to stand against a tomb swarm will drown beneath an unstoppable wave of undead beetles, biting, clawing, and burying themselves in the warmth of living flesh. Victims who gasp for air or cry out in fear are quickly silenced as a deluge of insects surge down their screaming throats, muffling cries of pain as they are devoured from the inside out. Tomb swarms are drawn to the magic animating the undead, but it is to the Lich priests and tomb kings that they are most keenly attracted. Not possessing a spirit of their own, they are easily controlled by the implacable will of the tomb kings. Left to their own devices, they revert to an instinctive lurking behavior, making them ideal guards for the pyramids of slumbering tomb kings. Trespassers foolish enough to dislodge a capstone will find themselves quickly overwhelmed by a surging swarm of creatures. They are drawn to the warm blood of the living, trying to feed a hunger that no amount of flesh can ever sate. A tomb swarm's victims, poisoned by hundreds of bites and stings, are rapidly consumed by the vicious creatures eat through their skin, clothing and bone alike. There can be no escape from a tomb swarm, for the size of the creatures is such that they can crawl through the smallest of gaps without hindrance. Tomb swarms can easily travel under the shifting sands of Nehekhara's desert, and burrow beneath the feet of their unsuspecting prey. Without warning, a tomb swarm can erupt through cracks in the ground, flowing over the surface like a flood, dragging their victims kicking and screaming beneath the sands, with the sheer weight of scuttling bodies. Of all the dead creatures that make up the bulk of a tomb swarm, two had special significance in ancient Nehekharan society. The flesh-eating skull-carapaced Khepra beetles were believed to be the messengers of Usirian, god of the underworld. They were his agents in the mortal world, and through their eyes would Usirian know the sins of all men. It was whispered that those who displeased Usirian were punished in death. Forbidden to enter the golden paradise of the afterlife, they were instead condemned to the lowest depths of the netherworlds, where a hive of Khepra beetles would burrow into their mortal bodies and gnaw on their insides for all eternity. The other creatures of the importance was the black-clawed desert scorpions. The scorpion is the form of chosen by Sokth, the god of treachery and murders. Ancient Nehekharans believed that the scorpion would not sting one of Sokth's murderous followers, so those accused of killing another were pushed into a pit of scorpions. If a victim somehow managed to survive his trial by scorpions and drag himself out of the pit, then it was taken as a sign that they were indeed favored by Sokth, and hence guilty of their crime, the punishment for which was death by being thrown into a pit of snakes. Those who perished died in agony as scorpion venom coursed through their veins, but they were at least innocent. So, I don't see these coming out of the army, or in Total Warhammer 2. I love if they did, because they have this ability called Entomb Beneath the Sands, meaning they literally sprout up from the ground in the same way we see Menace from below. So that'd be really awesome to see. They also have poison attacks, and they're undead, so they cause fear. So it's a lot of fun. They have a high leadership, so they never flee. Overall, the tomb swarms, of all of the swarms, with the jungle swarms, of the rat swarms, I find them to be the most thematic and the coolest, because they can really do a lot of harassment, right? They have, for those of you that are big fans of tabletop, they have 5 wounds and 5 attacks, so they're not really strong, strength 2 and toughness 2, but they can really piss someone off, and that's going to be the point of them. You pop them up behind a back line, and you're harassing a unit that can no longer use its archery skills to hinder your line. So that's how the tomb swarms would really be used, is that kind of popping up from beneath the sands and kind of doing quite a bit of damage here. But I really like them. I wish they'd make it in, but we don't see jungle swarms, we don't see rat swarms, we don't see high elf swarms. Those don't exist. But it'd be really cool to see these swarms of all of them in the army, because they need something kind of like this, because they don't have a lot of like backline skirmisher type harassment units like a lot of other armies really do. closest thing they do is they have their fast cap, but they don't have like any kind of hounds to go kind of lopping behind that back line and eating some things up. So I love to see them kind of maybe add these things in somewhere or another. But let's jump on over to two of these next guys come in a combo pack. I mean, well, when you bought the box, you could either make these Sepulchral Stalkers or these Necropolis Knights. And the Necropolis Knights, you'll find out here, are going to be our next big cab option. Let's just dive right into their lore blurb here. Necropolis Knights are elite warriors who ride atop giant snake-shaped statues. They are tethered to the mounts by a sharp hook, held firm in one mummified hand as the other wields a heavy spear that carves through mortal flesh. Their monstrous mounts shatter bones with every swipe of their tails, and sink scimitar-sized fangs deep into soft flesh. Necroserpents were built to guard the entranceways of the mortuary cult's temples. They are vast in stature, and even coiled, they stand at least twice the height of a man. Though the necroserpents standing sentinel outside some mortuary temples depict images of skull vipers or double-headed blood asps, the vast majority of these statues are created in the image of a hooded Carrion cobra, for Quaoth, the Nehekhara god of cobras, took this as his corporeal form. Quaoth was said to have preyed on the dragons that dwelt in the great land before the coming of man. The god would lie in ambush beneath the surface of the deserts before lunging toward his prey and sinking his spear-sized fangs into their scaly throats. The venom of the Carrion cobra is so potent that even a single drop is enough to kill a dozen warhorses or scores of fully grown men. Those bitten die with a rictus grin of agony on their face, as every muscle in their body contracts to the point where their own bones and teeth snap and break. The fangs of the necroserpents mysteriously drip with this very same poison. At the base of every necroserpent is a pedestal in which there is a hollow alcove. Within each rests the sarcophagus of a Necropolis Knight. In their lifetimes, these warriors served in the sacred ranks of the Tomb Guard. They were all loyal soldiers and battle-scarred veterans. However, the constant years of violence and slaughter had become so deeply ingrained in these warriors' psyches that their bloodlust threatened to overcome their famed martial discipline. Such soldiers would break ranks without warning and could no longer be trusted to stand their ground whilst a foe still lived, actions that placed the life of the king in mortal jeopardy. When faced with the dishonor of exile, many committed ritual suicide, but some instead chose an agonizing death for a chance to serve their king again in his eternal army. These brave soldiers would slit their palms and smear blood onto the belly of one of the giant necroserpents before holding the wound under the venom dripping from their fangs. As the poison racked their bodies, it was believed that Quaoth would judge their souls, and those that were found worthy would be reborn in the next life as Necropolis Knights, warriors blessed with the skill, power, and strength of the gods. Upon their death, these elite warriors were mummified and buried with their full panoply of war, beneath the very same statues that they had sacrificed themselves before. When Necropolis Knights are awakened to serve in the Tomb King's eternal army, the necroserpents coiled above their resting places would magically slither to unlife as well. Rider and mount are animated by the same warrior spirit, and they move as one being, riding to war in perfect ranks of terrifying cavalry. The necroserpents travel beneath the ground at a relentless pace, emerging from the depths with sand cascading off their forms, warriors standing proudly upon their hooded backs with spears lowered ready to spill the blood of their foes. Serpentine bodies weave through the battlefield, blades, fangs, and tails lashing out in all directions, leaving a trail of death and woe in their wake. There are few who can stand against the charge of a Necropolis Knight, for they are incredibly powerful and difficult to destroy. As mount and rider share the same soul, only by destroying both can one opponent truly defeat a Necropolis Knight. Few foes are equal to them to such a task. So they're really kind of awesome. The models themselves are pretty damn cool too. These big kind of like huge like serpent creatures with these really cool like tomb guards on top, like very cool, distinct, very different looking from the rest of the army, right? This is the beginning of it starting to really kind of branch off into the animated constructs of the army, and they're going to have a little bit different of a look, but also that overall Egyptian feel. So that's the kind of cool thing about these Necropolis Knights, is they still kind of stick true to that theme. And they have quite a few special rules. So they have poison attacks. Well, the Necroserpent does. And they have killing blows. So this would be an anti-infantry AP poisoned attack undead monstrous cav unit. So it's going to have as many probably in a unit that you would see with like a Demogryph Knight. It's not going to be your typical Reiksguard where you have a huge unit of them, or your Dragon Princes where it's a huge unit of them. They're monstrous cav, so it's going to be a little bit smaller of a unit size, obviously. But they also have stone hide, so they have a 3+ armor save in the tabletop. So in how that would confer in Total Warhammer 2 is they would definitely be considered armored, of course. So this would also probably give them maybe a bronze or a silver shield. They can, that way they can fight against, or range defense shield is what I mean. So maybe they can have some sort of resistance against a hail of archer fire. But they're really kind of cool. They really kind of stand out as a very cool centerpiece in the army. They've always kind of been one of my favorite units. Followed by the Ushabti, which I can't stop talking about, but we'll get to them pretty soon. But that's the Necropolis Knights. That's your actual shock cav. That's your elite cav. That's your really only elite cav in this army. The next unit is very similar to them, but not overall. And from the description, I thought they were going to have Beneath the Sand special rule where they can kind of pop out anywhere, but that's going to be your next guys here, the Sepulchral Stalkers. Sepulchral Stalkers. Man, that word is throwing me for a loop right now. Almost like Bruce was earlier. These guys most certainly do not wear brooches, let alone capes. These are the Sepulchral Stalkers. The Sepulchral Stalkers were created by the ancient Nehekharans to delineate the borders of a king's realm. Over the centuries, the Sepulchral Stalkers have been swallowed by the shifting sands of the desert, and they now lie hidden beneath the dunes. Sepulchral Stalkers are statues that have the body of a snake, the upper torso of a man. Atop the statue's curved spines sit inhuman skulls, inside which glow eerie, baleful lights. Lying beneath the surface of the desert, they await for intruders to pass by before launching a devastating ambush. When the trap is sprung, several horrifying snake-like forms burst from the ground to surround their prey. The Sepulchral Stalkers impale their foes on ornate staves before they can realize they are under attack. However, it is not for the skill with which they wield these weapons that Sepulchral Stalkers are so feared. For those who gaze into their eyes are turned into pillars of sand, standing as still as statues themselves until a gust of wind blows them apart and scatters the grains into the desert. The incantations required to awaken Sepulchral Stalkers are complicated and difficult. First, a Lich priest must collect the remains of a fallen Nehekharan warrior, one whose skeletal body is broken beyond all hopes of repair. The Lich priest then walks out into the open desert under a full moon, where they scatter these fragments on the ground, casting powdered bone to the wind as they speak a magical incantation. At the ritual's end, they throw the eyes of a desert cockatrice onto the sand, and the offerings sink beneath the desert surface. The spirits of the warriors' remains are thus bound to the stone frame of one of the buried Sepulchral Stalkers. They are imbued with powerful enchantments and compelled to patrol the lands against invaders for all eternity. Sepulchral Stalkers can burrow underneath the desert as quickly as they can move across its surface. They are instinctive hunters who can sense their prey trudging across the ground above, and they can prepare their ambushes without even being seen. Those who are foolish enough to face Sepulchral Stalkers are magically transformed into sand. Even foes who can only catch a momentary glimpse of these creatures may find that one of their limbs crumbles in a shower of golden grains before their eyes. Those that stare any longer seal their own doom. Sepulchral Stalkers are said to be the desert's vengeance made manifest, and as suddenly as an attack begins, it ends. A lucky survivor might just witness the tip of a tail burrowing back under the dunes as a Sepulchral Stalker leave in search of other prey. It is claimed by foolhardy heroes that a Sepulchral Stalker can be tricked into staring at his own reflection, for these monsters are not immune to the sorceress's enchantments of their own stares. Rumors abound that they can be defeated with only a polished breastplate or a mirrored shield. However, it is perhaps safer to attempt to creep up behind a Sepulchral Stalker and strike off its head, but even then, care must be taken not to look at the decapitated beast, for in death a vestigial hint of arcane power remains in their infernal eyes. So you have kind of like a Egyptian Medusa. Their bodies, like snakes, I'm sorry, their lower bodies like snakes, their upper torso of that of a man, that of like a tomb guard in specific. They're very ornate looking armor. It's the same kind of ornate armor that we see on the tomb guard or on the Necropolis Knights for that matter. But they do have beneath the sands the special rule that I was hoping the Necropolis Knights would have, so they can pop up from the ground in the same way that we see with, like I was saying, with Madness Below or whatever the hell it is. They're undead as well, so they're going to have that same rule. Everything is going to be undead, so everything will cause fear. But the way they're transmorgifying like gaze, that's the name of the gaze that they use to basically turn people to sand, works is it essentially just you choose a unit and that unit gets hit, and you can in tabletop you roll a scatter die and it tells you how many times it hits the unit. And there's a bunch of things with the wounds, and maybe it does more damage to the Sepulchral Knights, so on, or stalkers, so on and so forth. So it's a pretty big convoluted rule set. And I don't see it making a one-to-one translation to Total War Warhammer 2. I could just see it having some sort of ability where it's a targetable ability, it does direct damage, or it maybe does like a huge debuff or something of the sort. I don't see it outright gibbing units or anything like that. I think it's just to be like a quick little like blast, almost like the Fist of Gods ability that Kroq-Gar gets. Something where it just shoots some damage. I just think it's going to be something pretty simple like that. But it is a monstrous beast. So you're going to get these kind of like the same unit size as, say, a rat ogre or something of the sort here. This is not a cav option, but I guess you could kind of look at it as a cav option the same way that rat ogres are. They can kind of bulldoze through a line. But it's going to be interesting to see if these things make it into the roster because of this kind of convoluted special rule of transmorgifying gaze. They might just overall drop that ability in and of itself. But they're very, very awesome units as you kind of see here from this these pictures of both the in art and the actual models themselves. But now I want to get over to my favorite unit in the roster, the Ushabti. And I can't wait to really go into these guys with you here, and we're going to see, we've already kind of seen a little taste of what they're going to look like from the leaked intel picture, but we should see more and more as they continue to trickle out those Tomb King goodies to us. But here's the Ushabti. Carved into the likeness of the gods and goddesses of Nehekhara, Ushabti stand as guardian statues around the perimeters of the necropolises and within the passageways of the great pyramids of the Tomb Kings. Ushabti are imposing monuments, and all who pass through their shadows tremble. In times of need, the Lich priests awaken the Ushabti with powerful incantations, and with the sound of cracking stone, the Ushabti step down from their plinths and daises, silent and ready for war. In ancient times, the living warriors of Nehekhara took a great strength from the fact that the Ushabti fought alongside them, for who could fail to be inspired by the physical representations of their gods marching into battles at their side? It was the ancient Nehekharans' belief that their gods and goddesses dwelt in the great land before the birth of man. It is said that the span of the deities' lives numbered in the thousands of years. After this golden era, when gods walked as men, they became invisible spirits, able to take on any form they desired. Thus it was that the Asaph, the beautiful goddess of vengeance and magic, chose the form of the asp, while others chose the crocodile, the lion, the vulture, or some other fearsome animal of the desert. Most depictions of the gods in the grand pantheon show them in these powerful forms, and their visages are commonly carved as guardian Ushabti in the necropolises of Nehekhara. Some of the most common statues depict the image of Djaf, the jackal-headed god of war and the dead, and Pakaf, the hawk-faced deity of the sky, whose piercing gaze is said to be able to see the sins of the deceased. Sculptured from stone, marble, and even jade, this magnificent statuary is decorated with filigreed gold and dazzling polished jewels. The rituals needed to animate these towering god statues are far more difficult and complex than those needed to awaken the legions of skeleton warriors. As a result, Ushabti are far more resilient than the skeleton warriors of the Tomb King's eternal army, and their warrior spirits are bound with far more powerful magic. In the ancient language of Nehekhara, the name Ushabti translates literally as chosen of the gods. Indeed, the divinities do not consent to any mere mortal inhabiting statues made in their image. Only the most powerful souls, those of particularly brave warriors and heroic champions, are judged worthy enough to animate in Ushabti's sculptured form. Thus, Ushabti are possessed by the souls of Nehekharan's mightiest heroes. Ushabti stride through the battlefield like gods of war, infused with the temperament and strength of their form's pantheon deity. Their statuesque bodies can withstand enormous damage, and they are incredibly strong. With a single hand, an Ushabti is capable of crushing an enemy's steel helmet and its contents with contemptuous ease. Ushabti wield huge ritualistic weapons, from large bladed staves that would take the combined strength of 3 mortal men to lift, to great bows that fire the arrows the size of spears. These mighty weapons are as elaborately crafted and decorated as the Ushabti who brandish them, their gilded surfaces engraved by a dozen sculptors with intricate patterns and hieroglyphs. In battle, Ushabti wield their massive weapons effortlessly, every sweeping arc of their blades cutting a bloody swath through their foes, and every arrow fired punching through their targets in an explosion of bone and gore. Al Gore, bone gore, invented the internet. But Ushabti are just some of my favorite units. They look really, really cool. I love like the whole, Dejaf or Anubis looking jackal head. I love like the raw looking hawk head. I just love that these guys kind of have almost like that Stargate look to those guys. And I always forget the race of those dudes, but they're really, really, really like they're like centerpieces, like very iconographic, but very when you see Ushabti on the battlefield, you know that there's some Tomb Kings. What I'm trying to say. They have some really cool rules too. They're pretty much just monstrous infantry. That's not necessarily too awesome in and of itself, but they have just like pretty impressive strength and toughness for the army at least. They have a pretty high weapon skill again for the army. These are skeletons, so again they're not going to have outstanding melee attack or melee defense. That's kind of the whole benefit of having skeletons is you can field large amounts of them. But the Ushabti are a little bit different here. They are going to be pretty stalwart. They are going to be pretty strong on the battlefield. Think of maybe a slower moving crypt horror with ranged abilities, because they do have these great bows. And I think we're going to see these guys in one of three iterations probably. Ushabti with great bows, Ushabti with great weapons, and Ushabti with weapons, just normal weapons I'm thinking here. Because that's the way I kind of see them being played out in Total War Warhammer 2, and we'll probably find out sooner rather than later about how they're actually going to be kitted out, because the actual units themselves with these great bows, it's basically like a ballista, or a bolt thrower, if you will, because they've got this this thing does essentially, as it says, it describes it launches spear-sized arrows from it. So it's like range 30, which is pretty considerable, which is about a little bit shorter than a longbow on the tabletop. And it's got a really high strength. So you're basically shooting a bolt thrower from a mobile unit like an Ushabti here that also can kind of somewhat defend itself. I mean, obviously, if you charge Ushabti with bows, they're going to get hurt pretty hard. But you've got this ability to have a mobile platform that allows you to have 3 shots of these things coming out of them. So it's well, depends on how many they put in a monstrous unit of these guys, and it depends on how much missile damage they're going to make these great bows. I could see them being as a really hard staple for every army, in that you have a lot of downrange fire coming from these things, because I don't think they're going to give them the bolt thrower capability to split their bolt into multiple shots or a single bigger shot for anti-large. I think they would just keep them probably just anti-large or anti-infantry with AP, and just have such a volume of them coming out from the total amount that would be included in a monstrous infantry unit. So I'm really, really excited for these guys and how they're going to do them. The image that we saw leaked from Intel maybe kind of hinted that they're going to do them slightly different than what we're going to see what we've seen in the tabletop, just like they did with the Croxagores. Croxagores are not like that on tabletop. They're not these big roided out crocodiles. They're more slender, taller, more dinosaur looking. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of actually really dig the Total War or the Creative Assembly interpretation of Croxagores. It's very different, and it fits the army because they stand out a little bit more in my mind. So I really am excited to see what they do with the Ushabti here. But now that we've gone into a little bit of the monstrous infantry and monstrous cavalry, let's go into some just monstrous beasts in the Tomb Scorpions. Tomb Scorpions are powerful creations of the mortuary cult, formed from a combination of stone, metal, lacquered wood, and fused bone. Burrowing beneath the surface of the desert, they attack suddenly and without warning, exploding into the fray in a shower of sand. They are lethal foes, for a Tomb Scorpion's tail carries a potent sting that can incapacitate the largest of foes, and they have powerful pincers that can slice a man in half. As they scuttle forward on 8 segmented legs, they hack apart anything in their path. Tomb scorpions are carved and molded into the representations of the giant mythical scorpions that are said to guard the entrance to the Nehekharan underworld. These fabled creatures are said to protect the realms of souls from the predations of dark demons who wish to feed upon the spirits of dead kings. Tomb scorpions also serve as sarcophagi, for the shell of each construct is formed around the cadaverous body of an ancient Lich priest. Although Lich priests are unable to die a natural death, many have perished through wounds sustained in battle. Those that fall are embalmed and interred within a tomb scorpion. Canopic jars containing their vital organs, or what withered remains are left of them, are embedded within the scorpion tombs in a ritualistic pattern that symbolizes death. However, some remnant of a Lich priest's spirit always remains trapped within their mummified corpses. Through incantations, these embers are rekindled, infusing the inanimate shells of the tomb scorpions with power. This magical source also provides tomb scorpions with a degree of protection against the spells of enemy wizards, whose sorcerous bolts of energy unravel and fade as they are absorbed harmlessly by the undead construct's carapaces. Each scorpion-shaped sarcophagus is inscribed with the hieroglyphs of preservation, and a ceremony of awakening is spoken by a Lich priest to animate to them. If the ritual has been performed correctly, the tomb scorpion will become infused with the residual power of the corpse within it. This ritual is exceptionally complex and lasts from moonrise until the first rays of dawn. The slightest mistake or mispronunciation can have dire consequences. A swarm of undead scorpions may burst out of the desert and sting the Lich priest to death, or desert spirits may turn the wizard's body inside out and feast on his withered remains. At the very least, the ritual will fail and must be recited from the very beginning. Occasionally, despite every syllable being uttered correctly, some of these ancient ones no longer respond to the incantations of awakening. That these constructs are truly dead is doubtful, as a spark of power can still be felt radiating from their carapaces. Rather, it is a thought that by binding their souls to the mortal plane, the Lich priests cheated the god of the underworld out of his rightful due. Thus it is thought that this jealous deity is not always willing to give up his long-awaited prizes by allowing the spirits of Lich priests to leave the realm of souls. When the Tomb Kings go to war, the Lich priests send out their magical call and summon the Tomb Scorpions into wakefulness. Those Tomb Scorpions that respond to their incantations will travel for leagues beneath the ground before they're clawing their way to the surface and falling upon their enemies with razor-sharp claws and stinging tails. It is a truly terrifying sight to behold the sands parting to reveal the monstrous form of a tomb scorpion, and very often the last thing their enemies will ever witness. So, a pretty rad, monstrous beast here. And you know, it's kind of like a repeating motif with a lot of what we're going to hear here with these constructs. There's going to be a line that you guys are going to hear that it's like, and it's a very, very hard ritual. That if you mess up, whole ton of bad shit is bound to happen to you. So bear with us, or bear with me, bear with you, bear with all of us as we deal with that repeating thing that we're going to be seeing here. But the Tomb Scorpions are pretty cool here. They're just like you would see with they're a singular monstrous beast, is what I'm trying to say here. They're not a unit of monstrous beasts like a harpies. Harpies are a unit of them, loosely based off of, or loosely a unit. But Scorpion would be a singular model here. And it's got quite a cool set of rules. So entombed beneath the sands, meaning just like the stalkers, they actually are under the sand. So they would have a stalk mechanic here, hopefully. And maybe, and I'm hoping here that the stalk mechanic, this entombed beneath the sands, wouldn't be the typical stalk mechanic that we would see with the other armies. I think it has to be a little bit different, because if it is just like other armies, and oh great, I found it, I can see them now, I can kill them. I think with Entombed Beneath the Sands, it kind of has to be a little bit more unique, or maybe it's a better stock on sandy terrain, something like that. Something where Entombed Beneath the Sands gives the Tomb Scorpions and Kings a little bit of an edge, because again, they do need that edge because a lot of their units are not durable. The Tomb Scorpion itself is actually quite durable. It does have a lot of wounds, so effective hit points is probably a really good way of thinking of that when it comes to Total War Warhammer. And effective hit points, you would look at that value by taking a look at the total HP, the melee defense, and the armor. That would effectively give you an effective hit point value. We don't have that in the game. I'm just letting you know that's how you get it, like in RPGs. But the Tomb Scorpion also has Killing Blow, so we would notice that from our Graveguard that we talk about so much. That's an AP characteristic with an anti-infantry tack on as well. And Magic Resistance 1, so they would have a little bit of magic resistance going into it, very much like we see with the majority of the Dwarf army. And poisoned attacks, which is pretty obvious, you know, it being a Scorpion. So I think that's going to be a pretty cool characteristic, right? This kind of almost like a sniper type monstrous beast, because that's one thing you always kind of see on the battlefield is, okay, here's a Hell Pit Abomination, here's a Hydra, here's a Cygor. I know where it's at, I see it, and I know I have to shoot that thing down or get that thing down or do whatever I can to neutralize it. With the Tomb Scorpions, I'm thinking, or at least I'm hoping, that we're going to have a way for it to be kind of sneaky, but also be somewhat durable, as indicative of its tabletop counterpart, if we even get it in the game, which I think we would. I hope we would. It is an animated construct, so we're probably going to see some benefits of that, depending on the legendary lord, as we've talked about those so much. But because the last couple units here are all constructs, I think the Tomb Scorpion would be really cool, kind of fit into it, because the things that we're going to talk about next are huge things, like on the scale of Ancient Stegodon. So these monstrous constructs, and the Tomb Scorpion would be kind of a nifty little sneaker, kind of like get in there, maybe like an 800 or 1200 point little unit that has got this cool stock mechanic, has got AP, anti-infantry, and poison. So imagine this thing just hunting down mages or hunting down vulnerable lords. I think that the Tomb Scorpion could place a very competitive character sniper in the Tomb King roster that I think that they desperately need, because the Tomb King roster is so overt and so infantry based and not very burst damagey based. But that's our little bit here on the Tomb Scorpions. Not to be confused with the Tomb King. I swear to God, the rock isn't going to pop out of this game with like half rock, half Tomb Scorpion, half Lich Priest. It's just that's not how that works either, because that's 150%. Just complete rubbish, guys. But, you know what's not rubbish are the next four things we're about to get into, because these guys are like the cream of the crop when it comes to the Tomb King. Like, these guys are like the all-stars. These are the ones on top. These are the ones that most people recognize when they look at a Tomb King army, because they're going to be the biggest things that we'll see on the, well, tabletop or on the battlefield from the mighty Tomb Kings. But we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about the Tomb King and Prince, the Cambrian War Sphinx. So we're going to go into the lore on that, because this is a mount, but it also can be taken separately. This is just like mammoths, or who misses those? I know I do. And also the stegodons for the lizardmen. So something that we've kind of, or at least familiar with the mechanic of having a monstrous mount that is also a singular unit in and of itself. But here is the Cambrian War Sphinx. Cambrian War Sphinxes are giant leonine statues that wade through the ranks of their foes, crushing them underfoot as if they were nothing more than bothersome insects. They are almost impervious to harm, and their stone-hard hides protect them from all but the truest strikes. Anything less than a direct hit from a war machine is likely to glance harmlessly away. Atop each Cambrian War Sphinx is an ornate howdah in which several tomb guard ride. These elite warriors direct their mount's actions as if it were an extension of their own mummified bodies, laying into the foes below with great double-handed spears. War Sphinxes were first constructed in Khemri to guard the entranceways to the king's inner sanctums. Over time, the rulers of the other cities demanded similar guardians, and before long, War Sphinxes stood sentry within every burial pyramid. Here, inside the vast amphitheater chambers, they are said to roam, preying on intruders whilst the king slumbers. Some kings even had a war sphinx constructed to stand watch over their own sacred sarcophagi, and these were especially lavish and ornate. Upon awakening, a tomb king would ride his royal war sphinx into battle, leading his army out of the burial chambers and into the blinding light of day. As with any Nehekharan sculpture, no two Khemrian war sphinxes are quite alike. The Necrotects were always looking to build grander and more impressive creations than those of their predecessors. Some war sphinxes have scorpion tails filled with potent venom, whilst others breathe fire, immolating their foes in blazing conflagrations. It is rare indeed for a new Khemrian war sphinx to be constructed, and most of those that are seen prowling alongside the Tomb King's armies have existed for thousands of years. If one of these giant constructs is somehow destroyed in battle, its sacred pieces are gathered up by skeletal work gangs and dragged back to the cities of Nehekhara to be restored and resculptured by the Necrotects of the Necropolises. Carrion war sphinxes are terrifying foes to face, and enemies that do not flee before them are swatted aside by the stone claws, or torn apart by fanged jaws. However, this is just a fraction of their full destructive power. When a Carrion war sphinx rears up above its prey, those lurking in its shadow are doomed. As the leonine monster crashes down, it smashes its boulder-sized limbs into the ground with appalling force. The resultant shockwave knocks foes off their feet, pulping organs and splintering bones. Those that survive this area-shattering impact find themselves in a crater of broken, twisted bodies. However, there can be no hope for anything caught directly underneath the point of impact. All that remains of these crushed unfortunates is a fine red mist that sprays over the victims' stunned comrades. So as you can see, the Carrion War Sphinx is quite the war mount, I would do say so myself. I actually kind of wish that the Mammoths had a similar mechanic here. It's actually called Thunder Crush Attack, which also sounds like a cheeky anime move that someone would use. Thunder Crush Attack! Ha! Sticking with that. But it's pretty cool in the tabletop because basically it does rear up on its hind legs and smash down and does a crap ton of damage. For those of you that are familiar with tabletop, it does a Strength 9 small artillery piece damage, the small splash token. So those of you who play Total War Warhammer have no idea what that means. But what I think that this means in Total War Warhammer is that we're going to get something like what is it, Blessing of Itza, or whichever one that Krokgar has that allows him to basically explode and shoot everything around him, giving him a way to get out of close combat. Well, rather than it having that effect to get the Carrion War Sphinx out of close combat, it would just be maybe a massive amount of damage right directly underneath it. So if you charge it into some foes, pop, Thunder Crush Attack, boom, explosion, displaces a lot of the unit, but also does a significant amount of AP damage because it is such a high strength hit from the tabletop. And speaking of AP, it does have Killing Blow. Well, it doesn't. The Tomb Guard crew do. So expect this to have AP values on it. So expect this to have anti-infantry values on it too. And I'm wondering how they're going to load this out, because the War Sphinx itself can choose some upgrades. You know, it can basically choose to have a breath attack, which is, you know, a standard edition flaming breath attack, or it can actually have what's it called, poison. So it'd be really cool to see either one of those, because the actual equipment itself, it's not a ranged Howdah type thing like we see with some of the other, what's those things called? Like the Mammoths or with the Stegodons. There's no ranged option on these guys. They're only going to use spears here. So it is going to have that characteristic, and I'm not sure what they're going to give to the actual War Sphinx itself as far as, okay, is it going to be anti-large? I think clearly it would have AP, because it's just this beast of the night, this giant construct that looks like horrible. I mean, as you can see from the picture, like, holy crap, look at that thing. Imagine just walking up underneath that thing, just the shadow that falls upon you. Ugh. I'm already going to shit myself. But it definitely has a Howdah crew, as we've talked about, and the only two things outside of that, though, are its possible poison attacks, or its fiery roar, as it's called. So basically just a breath attack, and maybe it's going to be something similar to the Hydra breath attack, where it's maybe not on the level of course like a Star Dragon, but it's going to be some sort of short range, quick little breath attack that allows the Carrion War Sphinx to have a little bit more of a ranged threat on the battlefield, rather than it being just kind of kited around into oblivion. But I'm really excited to see these things, especially if you're having a Tomb King on top of it. It's probably going to be pretty beastly, just like what we see with the Mammoths. Like, oh man, Wolfric on that thing is such a monster. And even when we take a look at Mazdamundion's Lock, he's very, very strong at that point. He becomes a lot more durable. So we're going to see a similar mechanic here with the Tomb Kings and the Carrion War Sphinx. And since we're on that subject of Sphinxes, we might as well segue into what was actually a dual kit, just like the Stalkers and the Knights. The War Sphinx and the Necrosphinx, which we're about to get into, were a dual kit. So you'd buy one box and be able to construct one or the other. And I'm actually right on that this time, like I was not with the Vargeist and Vargwolf one, like I, full of myself earlier in my vampire video. But let's go to Necrosphinx and forget about all my mistakes that I think about when I'm trying to go to sleep at night. Necrosphinxes are nightmarish beasts of destruction that glide through the air in bounding leaps before falling amongst their terrified prey, scything down the living as mortal reaps the wheat of the field. None can stand against such terrifying beings, and only when all before them have been butchered will they stop. A Necrosphinx is a bizarre and horrifying statue, a strange amalgamation of the mythical beasts that are said to inhabit the Nehekharan underworld, maintaining order amongst the honored dead. A Necrosphinx has a torso and a face of a man and is armed with a gigantic scything blades that can sever the neck of a dragon in a single slice. Many also have a scorpion-like tail, better enabling them to stand sentry against the predations of evil. Finally, sprouting from the statue's back are a pair of ornate wings, which mimic those of the falcons that circle the highest levels of the underworld, keeping watch so that the souls of the damned may not escape. It was believed that by combining all these forms, the ancient Nehekharans were creating the ultimate warrior, one that possessed the strength to destroy all of their enemies. However, many of the mortuary cult's Lich priests believed these sculptures to be an abomination, whose presence would curse the land, for surely such beasts had no right to exist on the mortal plane. Following a century of plague and famine, the superstitious kings of Nehekhara agreed that the Necrosphinxes were to blame. But none dared destroy them in case it angered the gods of the underworld. Instead, vast pits were dug in the desert, in which the Necrosphinxes were buried, and all but forgotten with the passage of time. A Necrosphinx did not see the light of day again until a millennia later, when a mighty orc Wa swept down from the Badlands into Nehekhara. The greenskin horde attacked with a score of monstrous wyverns at their head, destroying everything in their path. As the Wa pushed towards Khemri, Settra himself ordered the mortuary cult to reawaken the ancient Necrosphinxes. More fearful of Settra's wrath than anything else, the cowering Lich priests obeyed and began a week-long magical ceremony. Upon the ritual's completion, a deep rumble reverberated throughout the desert. Moments later, fountains of bone-dry earth exploded from the ground as dozen Necrosphinxes broke the surface. Without pause, the stone monsters pounced upon the greenskins, slaughtering the savages with every sweep of their massive claws. Not even the mighty wyverns could halt their murderous rampage, for the nightmarish statues could cut through the greenskins monsters' thick, scaly necks with single strokes of their razor-sharp pincers. All Necrosphinxes have since been reclaimed from the desert sands to stand proudly in the sun once more, forming an important part of the Tomb King's eternal army. And wherever they travel, they spread death and destruction. The Lich priests do not think that a Necrosphinx is animated by the soul of a valiant warrior, like the other statues that walk beside the Tomb King's skeletal legions. Instead, they believe that the sinister gods, Fa and Ushabti, breathe life into these horrifying creations. These malevolent deities are said to dwell within mighty tombs beneath the sand, buried by the other gods for their destructive ways. If the Lich priests are right, then the mysterious gods have finally found a means by which to vent their fury upon the world. Whatever the truth, deep within every Necrosphinx is the burning need to destroy, and the incantations of servitude laid upon them are the only things that keep them from turning upon their creators and tearing Nehekhara asunder. Kind of awesome lore for these guys, right? And they're pretty huge and terrifying and awesome. I think of all of the monstrous constructs, beasts, creatures, mystical unicorn, demon, dragons of Warhammer, Necrosphinx is probably the most unique and one of the coolest. Like, I mean, there are very few things in high fantasy that take direct influence from something like a Necrosphinx. I mean, we all know what a dragon is. We all know what a manticore is in some variation, shape, or form. I mean, they're all go without saying. But a Necrosphinx, whoo, aren't you fucking original? But I'm pretty stoked on these guys as well. And I'm going to be saying that for the next 2-3 things here, guys, because I'm really excited about these larger constructs of the Tomb King army. I think they're pretty damn cool. But they have a lot of these same similar abilities that we saw with our War Sphinx, and that they have those upgrades. They can have Envenom Sting to give them a poison attack, but they also have Decapitating Strike, and basically it's like Heroic Killing Blow, which we've actually seen as an activatable option for, say, your White White King. They also have Killing Blow as well, which is AP, and I would see these guys though as being anti-large. If the War Sphinx is an anti-infantry, the Necrosphinx, from everything from the lore, we know them to be kind of like an anti-large hunter of dragons, hunter of large creatures. Even decapitating strike allows them to pretty much gib a monstrous creature from the tabletop. So I expect the Necrosphinx to be that monstrous beast that is the monster outright, that is just basically hunting the other larger creatures on the battlefield. And these things are going to be pretty terrifying too, because they're large targets. They can fly, so they're going to be just destructive. Like, imagine this thing going up against like any like flying force. With its anti-large, it's already going to be really hard to kill on its own, because it has like a toughness of 8 in the tabletop, which is huge. Very few things have a toughness that high, so it's going to be really, really hard for you to bring this thing down. But I'm assuming as a result, it's going to be pretty costly. Maybe like a 2,200 point Necrosphinx just floating through the air, all fat and obsidian-like, just going for all the like Leoncars of the world. But that kind of concludes our Necrosphinx here, and we'll get our last 2 of the roster for the Tomb Kings concluded, and that will be the conclusion of our grand video today. Nah, not really. I lied. There's actually 2 more on top of those 2, so we're looking at 4 more. I totally forgot about the siege weaponry of the Tomb Kings, but we'll jump now into the Necrolith Colossus. Towering over the Tomb King's skeletal legions, mighty statues of venerated heroes and ancient kings stride to battle. These stone giants are the Necrolith Colossi, and none can stand against them. In ancient times, before the rise of Settra and the founding of the mortuary cult, many were the legends of beings of immense stature that walked the land. According to half-forgotten inscriptions, these giant warriors were left by Nehekhara's gods to stand watch over the lands, immortal sentinels who would guard their realms against evil demons. So it is thought that the most ancient of the Necrolith Colossi were created by the gods themselves. However, the ancient Nehekharans constructed countless more, hewing their forms from mighty pillars of rock and carving them directly into the faces of cliffs and pyramids. Every necropolis in Nehekhara is now watched over by at least one of these imposing figures. Outside the ancient cities, Necrolith Colossi stand as motionless sentries, guarding important valley entrances and gateways from rampaging monsters and enemy warbands for aeons at a time. Made to resemble immense heroes of old, Necrolith Colossi stand noble and proud. Their forms are covered in skulls, bones, and mortuary ornamentation. Indeed, such was Nehekhara's obsession with death and immortality, that some colossi have been carved to resemble giant skeletons. Breastplates, vambraces, and sometimes great crested helmets were hammered onto the stone bodies of these constructs, each lavishly decorated with and engraved. As the skill of the priesthood grew, they turned their talents towards binding the souls of Nehekhara's foremost warriors in these vast statues, for who could face such a creation in battle? The incantations of summoning required were long and arduous, demanding the combined power of a score of Lich priests. Such is the magic instilled into the Necrolith Colossi that once spirits are bound within their mighty frames, they will never again need the incantations of the Lich priests to prompt them into wakefulness. Necrolith Colossi will react immediately to the presence of unwelcome strangers and move to strike them down. Stirring from their vigil, they shake loose the sand and dust that has settled on their immense forms and stride relentlessly towards the intruders. A Necrolith Colossus is armed with traditional weapons and armor, only on a massive scale, carrying vast bows or giant swords that stand taller than a troll. A Necrolith Colossus is a supremely powerful foe, and its weapons can carve through an armored knight and his barbed steed in a single stroke. In battle, Necrolith Colossi are terrifying to behold. The desert itself trembles at their passing, the impacts of their heavy footfalls sounding a mighty drumbeat that heralds impending doom. They are nigh impossible to stop, crushing foes beneath their feet and sending dead and broken bodies flying in all directions. So you kind of have the idea of what's being described here, right? A Tomb King giant. I mean, that's exactly what it says. That is exactly what it says in the box. Tomb King giant. And these guys, pretty kind of cheesy looking from the models, to be totally honest. They didn't really get much of a facelift into the 8th edition of Warhammer Fantasy, so they're kind of outshined by stuff like the War Sphinx, the Necrosphinx, that look just way cooler. Way cooler. But they do have some pretty cool rules here. You know, they're kind of like Ushabti in the sense that they can be melee oriented or they can be ranged, and their range is even stronger than the Ushabti because these guys are able to be exactly like a bolt thrower. You know, it says a bow of the desert is a bolt thrower with the profile shown below. So it's got AP characteristics on this thing because it says armor saves are not allowed. But I'm seeing that this thing, that the Necroth Colossus, the bow of the desert, would be exactly like we see with the Eagleclaw bolt thrower or with a Dark Elf bolt thrower, something that it can be either anti-large or anti-infantry, whichever you choose, with AP characteristic attached to both. So I think the Necroth Colossus is going to be a pretty cool monster unit because it kind of combines what's really cool about a Cygor and what's really cool about a giant into one unit that is probably going to be configured as Necroth Colossus with Bow of the Desert or just bow, or Necroth Colossus with great weapon or a hand weapon or something like that, whatever they want to consider it. But it's pretty cool here because it has like an unstoppable assault thing. Essentially what it does is its charges are a lot more effective, so hopefully it'll have some sort of ability where it has a passive charge, maybe just natively has a very high charge bonus, or it can pop an ability that is an activatable that gives it a large charge bonus, and that would really kind of round out the Necroth Colossus and make it kind of the dual threat that it's supposed to be. The big thing here, and something I neglected to get into with Ushabti and with Necroth Colossus and with the Skeleton Archers, the Tomb Kings don't have really good ballistic skill, which means they have a very low likelihood to actually hit their target. The nice thing about them is that they can field so many of something that they usually can hit them just by sheer volume alone. The Necroth Colossus suffers from this same plight. At a 2-weapon skill, or ballistic skill, it's not hitting anything too easy like, but it does have those arrows of Asaph that all the other range units have. So hopefully this will come into effect in Total War Warhammer. Remember what it does in tabletop, we've gone over this before, is that it negates the penalties for any kind of ranged attack. So firing into forests in Total War Warhammer, would this negate that penalty? Would it always hit the unit? I'm really curious to see what they do with arrows of Asaph, because it could be not potentially game breaking, because I think we already know that they're going to have a very low likelihood to hit things, but I want to see that them convert this into Total War Warhammer in a good way, and they've done that again so many times with these rules, converting them to do a good justice. So I'm not too worried about that. That knocks out our Necroth Colossus, and we'll get into our last monster unit, our last construct before knocking out the two quote-unquote siege weapons of the Tomb Kings. But that last one here, it's got kind of an interesting name. There's hieroglyph, there's the word hieroglyph, and then there's, a hierophant. This is a hero titan, but not Hero, but Hiero titans, all one word. And unfortunately, these guys don't have their own model in tabletop. What a lot of people did was they kind of combined a Tomb King giant with a Necrosphinx upper torso to get something that is a little more Titan reminiscent, or they'd use even demon legs, a bunch of different variations. But the Hero Titan didn't have a model, unfortunately. So we'll go into the lore on these guys, and it's quite a good one at that. A Hero Titan is a gigantic animated statue whose face is carved in the likeness of one of the Nehekhara deities of death. These idols radiate a sinister aura of magic, and it is said that those who stand within their shadow can hear the cruel laughter of the ancient gods. Hero Titans were constructed to stand within the uppermost chambers of the Tomb King's burial pyramids. It was believed that they would act as spirit guides for the souls of the deceased kings, responsible for ushering the eternal spirits of monarchs between the mortal world and the realm of souls. No expense was spared in sculpting a Hero Titan, a towering effigy whose form was lavished with gold and gems. In one hand, a Hero Titan carries an elaborate staff, which bears the hieroglyph of the sun god and lights the Hero Titan's path as it walks in the abyss that separates the mortal world from the realm of souls. This light wards away the evil spirits that dwell in the dark, demons who would otherwise prey on the souls of those wandering in the void. The Hero Titan's other hand grasps a giant pair of scales. According to legends, it is upon these scales that the king's soul is judged by the god of the underworld to see if it is worthy enough to enter the realm of the honored dead, or whether it is to be cast into the fiery pits of the netherworld. Both these items are wrought with powerful incantations, for the fate of the king's eternal spirit depends upon them. In battle, the hero titan can infuse his staff with the light of the sun god, causing those caught in the dazzling rays to burst into flames. Likewise, the hero titan can unleash the power contained within his foreboding scales, and ethereal claws will stretch out and rip their foes' souls from their bodies. Interred within the chest of a hero titan is the mummified body of an ancient priest. These were the high priests of the mortuary cult that lived and died as mortal men, before the time when their knowledge was such that they could walk the lands of Nehekhara for all time. In their lifetime, these priests studied the art of communion with the gods. Thus, as they served their king in life, so their soul would continue to serve him in death. It is the magically attuned spirit of the deceased priest that allows the hero titan to walk in two worlds at once, acting as a conduit between the two realms. To a hero titan, the world appears as a dream. Their very presence on the battlefield creates a direct link between the mortal world and the realm of souls through which the gods hear the rituals of the Lich priests. When a hero titan strides across the land, the incantations of the mortuary cult are lent great power. Entire regiments of enemy soldiers are dragged beneath the sands at the uttering of the simplest incantation, and a single syllable read from a magical scroll can summon a vast plague of desert locusts that envelop and consume their foes. A pretty lore significant unit with the hero titan, because they have that kind of conduit to the gods here. And what they actually do with that, they have a special rule called Spirit Conduit. This is very similar to what we would see with Arcane Conduit already existing in the game. It basically increases the casting result of each ability in the tabletop. So maybe with this, it would just increase your total Winds of Magic regeneration, just like an Arcane Conduit, which would be very interesting because it's not necessarily a casting hero or lord or anything like that. It does have bound spells that it uses. In fact, 2 bound spells that we already know about. We'll go into those in just a sec. But it's kind of interesting that you could take this unit and it would effectively help out your Winds of Magic, because the Tomb Kings are going to need a lot of their Winds of Magic to cast a lot of their spells, because I see them probably having abilities very similar to what we see in High Magic, and we'll go into that with our Magic video, of course. But here's the two equipment items that will give us the idea of those bound spells. So, Icon of Petra. An Icon of Petra is said to illuminate the path to the realm of souls with the sun god's own light. This just gives him Shem's burning gaze. So we get directly a Lore of Light spell. The other ability is Scales of Usirian. The souls of those gaze upon the scales of Usirian are judged by the god of the underworld, and those are found unworthy are condemned to oblivion. Real simple here. Lore of Death, Spirit Leech. 2 really... Shem's Burning Gaze is iffy, but Spirit Leech should be a pretty cool ability to have on a Hero Titan, because the Hero Titan is meant for close combat. You know, it causes terror, just like the other 3 constructs do all cause terror. So it's meant to get up there and get pretty dicey here. It's got a pretty strong strength and toughness. So you're basically going to see this thing almost like a, maybe it's going to be like a constant bonus to Winds of Magic. Not in the sense that a Mortis engine benefits Winds of Magic, because it doesn't, but Mortis Engine is that kind of support unit that you almost always have to bring in a Vampire Count army. Maybe a Hero Titan will be that kind of support unit that you always want to bring in a caster heavy or a spell heavy Tomb King army, because it gives you access to a free Spirit Leech that is a bound spell, so it'll be outside of your Winds of Magic, and it will bolster your Winds of Magic with this Spirit Conduit / Arcane Conduit ability that it's got. So I'm also curious to see what they do with the model for Hero Titan, because remember, guys, we don't have a Hero Titan model. We really also don't have much of a Necrolith Colossi model, or Colossus model. So this is 2 opportunities for Creative Assembly to really step in and create something extremely lore heavy and awesome. And we've seen from a lot of these descriptions that the Tomb Kings, while somewhat of a drab sand color, they're also filled with a lot of rich blues and reds and golds and these magnificent gems of sorts. So you're going to see a really kind of forlorn but decadent army at the same time. I'm really excited to kind of get these guys on the battlefield here. But let's jump into our last 2 things and kind of complete our video here on the Tomb King roster. We'll start off our final 2 with the Screaming Skull Catapults, the only really true artillery piece that is a conventional artillery piece outside of the moving ballistas that are the Ushabti and the colossus, but the Screaming Skull catapults. The catapults of a Tomb King's eternal army are akin to the stone throwers of the other races, but instead of flinging rocks at the foe, they throw volleys of flaming skulls. The Lich priests cast terrible curses upon every one of these skulls, enchanting them so that they can scream hideously as they are hurled through the air, rising to a deafening crescendo just before they strike their target. These are the very death screams of the skull's former owners, the wailing shrieks of those slaughtered on the field of battle, and the agonized cries of prisoners captured at the moment of their execution. Many battle-hardened warriors are driven to the edge of sanity by the blood-curdling sound. This horrific ammunition bursts into hellish, ethereal flames when it is launched, and as the skulls arc through the air, they blaze an eerie trail of green fire behind them. Most of these skulls explode on impact, sending fragments of splintered bone in all directions and engulfing those nearby in a wash of balefire. Others smash into their target with horrifying force, infernal flames spilling out of empty eye sockets as the skulls chew through armor and warm flesh alike. Every Screaming Skull catapult is crewed by a trio of skeleton warriors. They load and fire their war machines with silent efficiency, unperturbed by the dreadful sound of their ammunition. The artisans of ancient Nehekhara wrought Screaming Skull catapults into the very image of destruction. The catapult's arms were shaped to resemble twisted bones, and their cradles were fashioned into vast skeletal claws, the so-called hands of death. The chassis of the catapults were carved to resemble the skeletal remains of a vicious desert predator, and sprouting from their spines are great towers of skulls. These are the remains of enemy champions, nailed to the mast of the catapult as grisly trophies. There they will wail in perpetual torment until plucked from their fastenings and fired at the enemy. Even the stoutest heart trembles with fear, knowing that such a fate awaits them should they fall against the Tomb Kings. King Behedesh of Zandri was the inventor of the Screaming Skull catapult, and he ordered many to be built during his reign. He used these extensively in many wars, and most famously to defeat the rulers of Erbi, who rebelled against him. These treacherous kings refused to submit to Behedesh's will, but when their armies were bombarded by the skulls of their own comrades, they fled and their cities burned. At every battle's end, the catapult's crew scoured the battlefield for the bodies of slain foes, decapitating any they found and carrying the severed heads back to be cursed by the Zandri's Lich priests. However, such was not the fate for the rebel kings. Behedesh decreed that these traitors were to be mummified alive and strapped atop his catapults so that they could watch the destruction of their cities from first hand. Even now, many centuries later, some catapults still have withered corpses bound to their timbers. Whether these are the same renegades that opposed Behedesh or the remains of other tormented souls has long been forgotten. Occasionally, a muffled sound, as faint as the rustling of dried parchment, ushers from the cadaverous lips begging for mercy. However, the skeleton crews are oblivious to their pleas, and even if they were not, they could not be heard over the banshee wailing of their ensorcelled ammunition. So, very, very simple, not scary at all. Pretty, Care Bear-ish Screaming Skull catapult. Nothing at all out of the ordinary, bound with dead dudes on top of it, just kind of ooh. God, it's a snuff film. But the cool thing about the Screaming Skull catapult is it's kind of like a grudge thrower, right? So the grudge thrower is, shooting huge stones, and it's going to be doing that damage to leadership. It also sunders armor, but this thing is not going to sunder armor. This bad boy is going to have magical attacks and flaming attacks, and on top of it, it's going to do a penalty to leadership. You can upgrade the skulls to Skulls of the Foe, but I don't really see that making it into the game. I think they're just going to have a static penalty or hit to leadership, just like we see with the grudge thrower or the goblobber, stuff like that. I'm sorry, I meant the goblobber, not the grudge thrower. The goblobber is a grudge thrower. Ipso facto, potato, shiitake mushroom, whatever. But I'm pretty stoked to see these because we already know they're going to have a low ballistic skill from tabletop, but we also see that with Skaven. They have a low ballistic skill with their artillery pieces too, so it doesn't seem to really affect them. How many times have you just been nailed by a warp lightning cannon? Your lord could be strafing left and right and still just get pummeled by that thing. So I don't think it's going to have a terribly low accuracy, to be totally honest. And I think it's going to be cool here because everything in the army pretty much causes fear or terror. So you're going to have these screaming skulls constantly smashing apart their leadership at the same time with flaming attacks and with magic attacks. So it's going to have a wide-ranging application too. You know, it can attack some creatures that most of these artillery pieces cannot, unless it's what's it called, the Great Witch Hunter, the Great Cannon. I can't think of its regiment of renown. You know, the Screaming Skull Catapult out of the box is going to be a little bit more, I guess, useful, I guess you could say, as far as its application to what it can go up against. So I'm really excited to see this unit come to the game because, like I said it so many times, the Tomb Kings need these little things here and there that make them seem quote-unquote OP. But again, it's what makes the army hold, because a Tomb King general has to really know his army inside and out to be effective in tabletop. And I was thinking that with Total War Warhammer, we're going to see a very hard and challenging army that's going to be extremely rewarding to master. But let's jump into our last unit here. The Ark of the Covenant. I mean the Casket of Souls. Not in any way like the Ark of Covenant that you'll find out about right now. At the heart of each tomb of the mightiest kings, there lies a casket inscribed with hieroglyphs of malediction. Within these sarcophagus resides the tormented souls of those who have incited a Tomb King's wrath. Powerful binding inscriptions ensure that these souls cannot leave their prison until the moment when the casket is opened. A casket of souls is not physically carried into battle, but is summoned through the incantations of a keeper of the casket, a priest of the mortuary cult whose sole responsibility is the custodianship of this revered object. As a keeper of the casket intones the proper chants, a fountain of skulls bursts from the ground below. These gush forth, forming into a mound that spills over, revealing the casket of souls atop a dais of bone, with a nimbus of sorcerous energy swirling around its infernal form, and the two undead guardians by its side. The power surrounding the Casket of Souls is such that nearby Lich priests can infuse their incantations with a portion of its energy. When a Casket of Souls is opened, blinding light spills across the battlefield as countless souls scream into the air, seeking freedom from the suffering of their confinement. These spirits plunge through the bodies of the Tomb King's enemies, and the hapless victims suffer unbearable agony as their life essence is utterly drained. To die thus is far worse than a physical death, for the very soul of those who perish in this manner become ensnared by the power of the casket. A casket of souls is a devastating weapon, for all who look upon it risk eternal damnation and imprisonment. Only the attendant keeper knows the incantations that will open the casket, and if he is interrupted, the souls of the damned are insanely sucked back inside. If a casket of souls is ever destroyed, the tortured souls will escape their confines in a raging maelstrom of destruction, feeding on everything caught in the magical backlash as they wreak their revenge. So this thing is a war machine, but it's not like a typical one. It's actually a little more similar to the Anvil of Doom in the Dwarf Army. Not in the Total War Warhammer Dwarf Army, in the tabletop Dwarf Army, because it can't move around all willy-nilly. The Casket of Souls is pretty crazy, you know? So it's got some little guards with it that have killing blows. So it's like an AP characteristics on those guys and anti-infantry. But the big thing here is Light of Death. When the Casket of Souls opens, tortured spirits leap from foe to foe, leaving a trail of death in their wake. You know, just like the Ark of the Covenant. But basically what this thing is, here's how I'm trying to envision this thing. Like a stationary Luminarch that has a very, very high weapon damage and is basically just a direct beam sniper. And you choose an opponent or a unit, and it'll shoot that unit. Now, in the tabletop, it does a leadership test to determine if it actually hits. You obviously can't do that with this game. So what I think will happen is a random die will be rolled to decide if it bounces from unit to unit. In the tabletop, it can keep bouncing and bouncing and bouncing if your rolls are just on point. Like if you just got like the Las Vegas fingers and you're just like tossing it like craps, like Yahtzee, it's just going to keep bouncing around the battlefield. And I'd love to see that in Total War Warhammer. Well, maybe a little comedic, but if you shoot it into like one unit in the front line, it has a chance to bounce across the front line or bounce to the closest one within a certain range and keep that bouncing cascade. But I don't know how they're really going to do that 100%, and I don't know how they'd kind of curb the weapon damage on it. Maybe it's got a really high weapon damage and a somewhat low chance of bouncing, or a pretty moderate weapon damage and it bounces quite often. So you're just kind of constantly shooting with this thing like a turret in the backfield. It wouldn't be able to move, but it would just be constantly shooting at your opponent, being backed up by Screaming Skull catapults at the same time too. So that'd be kind of an interesting thought here. In the tabletop, if you have more than one on the battlefield, it actually adds to your winds of magic is the best way to describe it. So maybe fielding 2 of these gives you a passive bonus to regeneration on your winds of magic, or an activatable one-time boost to winds of magic. That's something I could definitely see with these Casket of Souls, or maybe just it always has a one-time boost and it's an activatable only, so you can only field 1 or 2 depending on whatever you want to do, and maybe it's just a 5-shot winds of magic burst or something like that. And the last special rule for this thing is Unleashed Souls. So basically, when it's destroyed, anything within a certain range of it basically has to roll a special thing or else it's killed. So maybe it has an exploding mechanic like a lot of the Tomb Kings themselves do, or some of the special characters that we've seen from the Tomb Kings roster have as well. So that's what I'd love to see from the Casket of Souls, and I kind of saved that for last year because it is a bit juicier and a bit more different and very definitive of the Tomb Kings. A lot of these units we've talked about so far are so definitive. But that's really what makes the Tomb King army so cool and so unique, is that it is like that Empire kit army, but with all these other different applications and not as strong of an infantry base as the Empire, well, as weak as that is. There's so many different unique and colorful and fun ways to fight with the Tomb Kings, and I'm really excited to bring them into the Vortex campaign and the Mortal Empire campaign, because, I mean, you play High Elves and Wood Elves, High Elves and Dark Elves very similarly, and as overall they're a very standard regimental type force. They're very easy to kind of wrap your brain around. Even the Lizardmen, for the most part, you're not going to have a conventional back line. They fight a little bit more like a constant moving faster dwarf army with a pretty good resilience. Even the Lizardmen are somewhat comparable here. The Tomb Kings are not going to fight like vampire counts here. You're not going to have this like these beastly vampires that are going to pretty much keep the army afloat. You're going to have these monstrous units, these monstrous constructs. Some of the biggest weakness of the vampire counts is their inability to put down, like, say, a giant. Well, with the Tomb Kings, you're going to have plenty of tools to put down those anti-large. You're going to have a lot of different answers for a lot of different questions with the Tomb Kings, and I'm really excited for them to come into the Total War Warhammer 2 world. I think with all that's kind of happened in the past 2 months, I think we as Total War fans are really stoked to see this. I don't want to say we deserve it because it kind of sounds weird. I'm not an entitled gamer. I just like to have a good goddamn time. But I think it's going to be a really, really cool positive touch on the beginning of 2018 for Total War, when the very end of 2017 had a lot of lackluster things here and there. So I think this is really getting the year off on a good foot, and maybe that was Creative Assembly's intention. So who knows, But I'm excited here, guys, to really kind of get Tomb Kings in everyone's hands. Hopefully I'll get some early access and I can show you guys some stuff ahead of time. Turn and I will be just balls deep in that. But thanks so much for joining me here today, guys. Hopefully this kind of added to the hype train that Creative Assembly has built here in the holiday season, now that we've hopefully seen a little bit more from them. I made this video before any kind of trailer came out, but after that letter came out, so hopefully the trailer came out by the time this video comes out. Hopefully I'm not just shooting myself in the foot and go, it's not coming out, god damn it, Italian Spartacus. But we'll see here, guys. I'm really excited. Feel free to comment on anything. For you guys that did play Tomb Kings in tabletop, I'll be totally honest, I did not play Tomb Kings in tabletop. I played Vampire Counts. So if there's some things that I forgot from maybe 7th edition or 6th edition that you want me to go into more, let me know. I have the 7th edition book because I'm an ultra nerd, but more than happy to share any more goodies for you. We'll be doing a video on the magic as we always do. That'll be our last real big video on the Tomb Kings, and we'll go into some nuances after that. But thanks again for watching here, guys. Have a good one and take care.